My parents didn't move to America for me to do a stoner movie. There should never be, I think, any stigma or shame about the multiple jobs that we all tend to have as artists until we reach a point where it's the art that's paying all our bills. The extra N stands for not going to play a stereotypical taxi driver. If you believe the talent would get you anywhere, then you could look back and say, oh, the reason that things weren't diverse in Hollywood is that we just weren't talented enough. It was more of a generational shift than it was a political shift. I don't think that's necessarily the case right now. The folks on the progressive side need to be progressive and stand up for the actual values. There's no timeline on when anybody chooses to share or figures out on their own their sexuality, their identity, different parts of who they are. I think having regrets is a waste of time. Doing something serious, you have to bring some levity to it for it to really connect. Otherwise, you're preaching to like an insular bubble. The reason I wrote it is I felt like there wasn't a book when I was 17 or 25 that talked about how to navigate making choices that the world thinks are mutually exclusive.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode on #Preach. I know I say this often, but today I really mean it. Today's guest needs no introduction. From giving us iconic cult characters in Harold and Kumar to playing Kevin in a much-loved How I Met Your Mother to serving 2 straight years in the Obama administration at the White House to today writing his own memoir, You Can't Be Serious, about manifesting his American dream, being a child of Indian immigrant parents. Kal Penn, or Kal Penn as we know him, has done it all. So today we're diving right in, no filters, just real talk. Let's go. This episode is powered by Nipposh. Good morning and welcome to #Preach. To say that I'm really excited and nervous is like putting it mildly.
Oh my God, why are you nervous?
I am extremely nervous because it's just so exciting to be able to talk to you, and I know I don't have so many hours to like sit with you, so I have to just like squeeze it all in. And I'm a long form person, so I struggle here. But for the sake of this platform and the fact that you're sitting in Bombay, India, I'm going to call you Kalpen for this podcast.
I will call you Shubika.
Okay, you
for
can
the
do
same
that.
reasons.
You can call me Kittu, that's fine. I'm Punjabi, I have a nickname. Okay.
But wait, good morning to you too, and not to be formal about it, but thank you for having me. I've been a fan.
No, I'm
I
thrilled.
know we have mutual friends, but this is exciting for me too.
If you had to talk about your origin story, how did Kalpen become Kal? What would it be like? Start from the beginning. But very short blurb. I know you've done it for your book, but you can do it for us.
No. Of course I can do it for you.
Yeah.
I mean,
like
look,
a superhero story, origin story.
if you, first of all, I appreciate that, right? But I think, to me, it's like if you, like what, we're trying to distill 40 years of stuff into a couple hours, however long we have to chat. So I appreciate it. And I would also say this book that I wrote that came out is it's for that reason that I never had something like that when I was 17 or 25 to talk about, all right, what if you, A, you want to do something creative, but B, what if you don't view your life in a linear manner, right? And you want to kind of jump around between different passions. Is that a thing that you're allowed to do, as if we need anybody's permission to do it? But then at some level you run your own successful business. You're known all around the world. That also must not have been easy, right? I'm sure people told you that you were crazy or they said no along the way. So I just want to preface with that. I'm mindful that this is not okay, how do you do this in a year? And the other reason that I'll say that is I think, now I'm going to sound old, right? But because everything is digitized, because we get immediate gratification, if you want to order food, you open an app and it shows up 20 minutes later. If you're angry about something, you can just open any number of social media apps and rant about it. It doesn't change anything necessarily, but it feels really good. And sometimes you get validation from your peers in the same bubble, so it feels like you've done something. And I think that's a lot different than knowing that a certain goal might take 5 years or 10 years or even 20 or 30 years, right? There's this famous story of George Clooney didn't become George Clooney till he was in his 30s or even 40s maybe. So all of which is to say, I'll give you the origin story, but I always want to put it in the context
of, course, yes, I appreciate
of why things take a lot longer. So yes, you met my dad, and my dad moved to the U.S. in the early 1970s At the time, there was a labor shortage in the States, mostly in fields like engineering and medicine. It's one of the reasons you see so many Indian American doctors and engineers. There's nothing in our DNA that makes us better at that, as evidenced by my inability to do either of those two things. But so my dad and then all the other aunties and uncles who I know sort of came during that time period. So he moved with, as he loves to tell us, $12 in his pocket, but also, admission to a graduate program in engineering to help fill that labor shortage, which ultimately led to a green card and then citizenship, again, as part of like the need for the United States to have these sorts of people there. So then when my brother and I were born and raised in the States, it's your classic immigrant story. You grew up as American kids with non-American or non-American origin parents. And in my case, I was just like the weird kid. You could tell like my brain just operated very differently. All of my report cards every single year from the time I was little would say things like, he's very conscientious,
Wow.
but he daydreams constantly. And I was like, well, yeah, because the teacher is so boring. And I would rather, the story I made up in my like 8-year-old head was sick, you guys. Like I was on other planets, right? So I think from the time I was little, I realized, A, that's not normal, but then B, is there a way to turn that into something else? And went to a public high school. The public high school district that I was in had a performing arts high school in the district. So I had the chance to get this like pre-professional training in high school that I certainly would not have had if I didn't have a publicly funded arts program.
Were you good right from the beginning?
I mean, good is, especially if you're talking about something like the arts, it's so subjective, right? So
No, I mean, you had peers, you had teachers, professors who could always like hold up the mirror and say, you're good, or you need work, or you're a natural.
I think I was blessed with having teachers, especially in high school. What my acting teacher in high school, at the school in particular, who would teach us both. So he would say, yes, you have a talent for this. Let's acknowledge that, but then let's also acknowledge the type of hard work that's required and the training that's required to do certain things, right? And then what's your goal as an artist or an actor? The goal, and I think the goal that we were both taught, and that certainly was what my experience was for me, the goal would be, can I pay my rent and all my expenses just from acting? So whether that's doing a play in a 90-seat theater off Broadway, or whether it's having the privilege of being on a TV show that obviously is blessed with a different level of income, like it was just about paying the rent at that point. And I think at that point also I didn't fully appreciate what I do as a business. That came a lot later. But so went to this performing arts school. I'm sorry, Shamika. I ramble a lot. So went to this performing arts high school. And then when it was time to apply to colleges, I applied to like 15 schools. Half of them were for theater, film, and television. The other half were for just general liberal arts. And I was pleasantly surprised. I wasn't expecting to get into UCLA or NYU or USC.
Why did you choose UCLA over NYU?
So ultimately, I went to UCLA Theater and Film School because I grew up right outside of New York City. And I kind of wanted to see what it was like on the West Coast.
Right.
I wanted to, I had more of a passion, I think, for film and TV over theater. And it felt less safe to go to UCLA than it would have been to stay closer to home. And I just thought, I'm 18. Like, if there's ever a time to take a leap of faith and be less safe, this is the window of opportunity where you're also protected by being in school and living in a dorm and all that stuff.
What you're saying is that you had that very practical approach to even something as offbeat as acting from very early on.
I don't think I had that nuance. No, I think that I can actually pinpoint probably when that nuance came. Well, I think it came later. I think that level of nuance came once I was in LA. So I think the idea of taking a leap of faith came early, but that was a separate thing. That was just like, and at the time, for the Indian immigrant community in the States, and I'm talking late 80s into the late 90s, there was this feeling that because the community largely was allowed to come to the U.S. only to pursue these types of science careers, of course, like I sort of half-jokingly say, like my parents didn't move to America for me to do a stoner movie. Like that's just a fact, right? They didn't. Yeah. So once you start doing that, it's disruptive for the community. And so the best of intentions, Priyanka talks about this in her book in a really beautiful way, and I'll paraphrase it, and I paraphrased it in mine as well. which is that, like, you know, aunties and uncles who you're not related to by blood, that doesn't mean that you have any less of a familial bond with them, right? Like, they think of you as their own kid. Your success is their success. And so that can go both ways. Like, when that's in the United States and it's relatively insular and you're doing something like the arts, they'll go out of their way to tell you that you should not be pursuing a career in the arts. And when you're an American kid who doesn't fully understand why an auntie or uncle who's not your blood relative should say that, it's really jarring. So I think working through something like that and then realizing as an adult that all came from a place of love. When I wrote my book, one of the fact-checking conversations I had with my parents was actually towards the end of the process. And the way I asked this question to my mom and dad, I said, I remember how embarrassing those years must have been for you. You know, everyone else's kid was going to medical school and doing all these things that were expected of them, but they also wanted to do themselves. So I'm like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how embarrassed were you of me? And my parents said, we were never embarrassed.
And you asked them to just give a number.
A number. That's all I said. I was
Which
like, just
is-
give me a number.
yeah.
Because when I'm putting it in the book, I was like, I just want a number.
1 to 10.
1 to 10.
Yeah.
That's it. And they said we were never embarrassed. We were scared because we just didn't think that this was a career that somebody, from our community could do, but especially our kid could do. And I was like, it took me being like 39 years old, 42 years old to ask you that question and realize that all these years I just thought you were embarrassed of me. Like, not that they were embarrassed of me, but at the time that was an embarrassing experience for them. So that's why I say I don't think I did a leap of faith. It was more of just, I didn't necessarily feel like I was understood in why I wanted to pursue the arts until later. And I also recognized that that's because there was no benchmark of, hey, this is something we can do. And of course, the community has been incredibly supportive. My parents are wonderful and have been to every movie premiere, you know, since the beginning. Even if it was movies, they're like,
even if
what are you doing in this movie?
Did they ask you post the movie, like, do you actually smoke up? Like, do you do this? Do you get stoned? Do you eat burgers that way?
Thankfully, look, all the coolest characters I've played are like way different from me. I think the real kicker for Harold and Kumar was, you know, the movie I did before that was called Van Wilder with Ryan Reynolds. And I play, Ryan is
Taj.
wonderful, but I play a character named Taj Mahal. Like, he's literally named after a building, okay? This is probably the among the last of the early 2000, like, teen sex comedies that were stereotypical, where he's oversexed, he's an Indian exchange student. And I remember when I got the phone call for that movie, there was an agent. It took me, 5 years to get an agent in LA. That's not common. You can usually get one sooner. And she called me and she's like, I have a great audition for you. It's a supporting lead in a teen movie. I said, okay, can you send me the script and what's the name of the character? Just email me the script. I'm so excited. If you're this excited to tell me that this is going to open doors if I get this job. So she kept saying, like, well, just come to my office and I'll talk to you about it. And I'm like, why? Why am I coming to your office if it's this great of an opportunity? Like, I want that gratification now. Send me the script. So she goes, okay, I'll send you the script. I said, and what's the name of the character? She said, the name of the character is Taj Mahal. So I hung up on her. And she called back. She's like, I knew you were going to do that. And I was like, well, look, with all due respect, I did not go to theater and film school to play this character.
Yeah.
And then,
is the other guy called Empire State?
No, of course not. The other guy had a human name.
Yeah.
So and by the way, this was not even like Taj Mahal was not a nickname, okay?
Yeah.
That was like the character.
Yeah.
His last name happened to be Badalandabad, so there's something going for him. But,
wow.
Yeah. But so that was... I wasn't sure if I was going to take that job.
Yeah.
I called a couple of people who were mentors of mine. And anyway, as that relates to your question, in the script, it is there's nudity in it. It's your early 2000s teen sex comedy.
American Pie.
Exactly like American Pie.
Yeah.
So I brought the script home for Thanksgiving when I was visiting my parents. And my sort of rule was, okay, this is the first big movie I'm doing. I'm gonna give them the script always, no matter what the content is, because I want them to understand that it's a job just like any other job, right? There are hundreds of people who work on a film. There's an actual script. There's so many people who think, and I'm sure they think this in the world that you live in, is like, you just have an idea and then it becomes a dress. Like, what? No.
Some people are surprised, oh, you use email? Like, as a designer, why do you have to use email?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, in school, I used to have, especially a lot of other Indian American kids who were like, why are you going to the library to study? Like, don't you just, play make-believe? I was like, first of all, yes, We do play make-believe. But second of all, there's a whole job related to that, right? So I showed them the script, drop off the script in their bedroom. They were going to read it. And I go back to my bedroom. And after 20 minutes, I just hear my mom go, "Oh my God, this is pornography." And I was like, okay, I've got to go back to the room, right? So I go back to the room. I'm like, it's not pornography. My dad's like, "Where's the pornography?" I'm like, no, it's not pornography, you guys. But they, that was one of their reactions because they saw there was going to be nudity.
So how did you walk your mom through it?
I just explained that it's not, right? And I explained what a rated R movie is.
Right.
And that, yes, there's nudity, but the difference between that, it's an awkward conversation, but it's also a necessary one. So when Harold and Kumar came out, to answer your question, I was also home around that time after it had come out, or after they'd seen the premiere, but before it was in theaters, and my Masi called. And I was like in the next room, and I could hear my mom talking to her, and I just hear her basically like in Gujarati say like, "Nai Van Wilder jo nathi awa, that is saru che." Like, it's not like that Van Wilder. This is actually really good. Like, this is better. He has a real part.
So upgraded.
Yeah, because she obviously understood like this is a lead role. You're one of the two title characters. And so there was.
And you were a doctor in the movie, so I guess
was
that
a doctor in the
plus.
movie. This is a very good point.
Yeah.
So you never know. Maybe that had something to do with it.
Yeah, you were in Scrubs. Okay. But I just have a question. Do you think creativity or art, are you born with it? Or is it a muscle that you can kind of exercise and build out? Like, do you think there is something inherently in you that made you who you are?
In my case, yeah, I think there are just things looking back, right? The need to storytell through this medium, or the need to perform, or the eye that you have for something ludicrous that makes you not be able to keep your mouth shut, and you're just like, I feel like if I regurgitate this in a creative way, it'll make people laugh. Like, or you could have just kept your mouth shut.
Yeah.
Right. So the inability to keep your mouth shut is like.
Right. That is the talent.
That is an art form, that right, or it's just a lack of filter. But I also, here's the way I sort of sometimes talk about this is I do a lot of guest lectures at colleges, and sometimes you'll get, especially from a lot of Indian American students, they'll say, "I really want to be a dancer, a fashion designer, a film director, but my parents won't let me. Do you have any advice?" And so I'll usually ask, "Well, what are you studying?" And sometimes it's medicine, business. Usually it's not the art form that they want to pursue. And so the only experience that I can share is like, look, in my case, of course, explaining to the community, especially if your folks are a little more conservative on this issue, it's tough. But trying to explain to a Hollywood producer why your character's name shouldn't be Taj Mahal, or why you should get that job to begin with, is always way harder. So I think a lot of people like the idea of pursuing a career in the arts, or pursuing a career that's on a path of its own. But I think there's a big gap between liking the idea of something and actually wanting to put in all the work to pursue it. Like, I don't know the rest of the conversations that you've had like this, but I assume like you offer a space for us to talk about those years in the middle that were the struggle, right? Based on that question, you've had your own experience with that. Most shows even that give people the idea of like, you do a late night show, it's like, tell me 3 quick stories about how fun it was working on this project. Of course, that's the gig. Like, you're going to do that. I love what I do. It is really fun. But I think it's those other years of that struggle that's the difference between whether you're born with it or whether you...
But I want to go back to this, to your origin. You brought up 2 really interesting points. One is the role of your parents. And the second is how you advise young folks who want to pursue the same thing. So when we talk about discussing something difficult with your parents, and with Indian parents, of course, your career is a very, very important conversation. Like, you have been born and bred to finally make something of yourself. Right. I feel like those conversations are easing out, but they're still very much a very scary subject for a young person to kind of navigate with their Indian parents. What advice do you give to the parents?
I'm going to say, too, first, I'm just going to like give a big shout out to my parents, because they started getting calls from other parents when I started working commercially, like professionally. And their calls would be like, "Hey, my kid wants to do this weird thing. Do you have any advice?" And they were so great about basically saying like, I don't know that they were wrong, because everything they believed and experienced was also valid from their point of view. But they always took the time to talk to these other parents and say, you should encourage your kid and always be honest with them about the pitfalls of what they want to get into. But they've been really good about that. I've had the privilege of talking to a number of parents, and it's interesting to see from that perspective. I'm also mindful of like, look, like the feeling from a lot of parents is, well, it's easy for you to say because you're professionally working in this space. And I totally think that's a valid like red flag for them also. Is like, well, what about my kid? What if my kid doesn't get into that space? Like, it just depends then on what your kid's benchmarks are for success. What's going to make them happy? The goals that we have might be different from our parents' goals. All those
feel
things.
it's important for you to give them a reality check that your kid may not see a paycheck for
100%.
for these many years. Like
Oh,
I
yeah.
always tell young designers
Yeah.
that your business, if you're starting a brand, you're not going to see any money for 10 years
Yeah.
straight. Because it's so capital intensive. You have to put back so much money because
Yeah.
you're manufacturing as and you're retailing. What is the number for you in terms of years? Like if you had to ask somebody to be patient for X number of years,
Yeah.
what is the...
So depending on the conversation, I'll either say 2 or 10 years.
Right.
The 2-year thing I always say is like, there are a lot of people who say, I'm going to move to LA or New York and try to be an actor, and I'm going to give myself 2 years. I think that's great. Most people don't even do that. But the question of what happens at 2 years and a day is like, well, what if that call comes 2 years and a day in? What if the writer you're working with finally gets VC funding for a short film on 2 years and 2 weeks? Like then you have not properly invested that 2 years, or was that just your benchmark and you're like, this is my space, right? I think for most artists, there's not going to be a timeline on that, and that's in some ways like kind of stupid because you would still be doing what you were doing if you were not a world-renowned brand, right? I'd still be doing this no matter what level of weird creativity I was trying to do. So the 10-year benchmark is just letting folks know, like, there should never be, I think, any stigma or shame about the multiple jobs that we all tend to have as artists until we reach a point where it's the art that's paying all our bills. That's the reality. So I agree with you 100%. I always bring that up when I'm talking to people's parents. Like, your kid will work multiple jobs, and that's not a bad thing. But also with other, like with younger people who are like, hey, what's the path forward? It's like, just know it's not going to happen overnight. And if you're good with 10 years of odd jobs, then you're good. And understandably, a lot of people aren't. Like, that's a big ask. 10 years is a huge chunk of your life.
A decade.
Especially if you're good at something else.
Right.
Or not even good at it, but if you could be fulfilled. Like, okay, in my case, I could not get into medical school. I'm just not good enough at like science and things like that. But let's say that, I don't know, let's say there's something I would have been good at that I could do. I still don't think I would have done it.
But do you feel it's important to have a side hustle?
My mom will tell you that from the time I was little, this is very teenage cocky energy, okay? And I don't know that I would say the same thing today. So when I went to college, it started with, you're not majoring in theater, to, oh, you got into NYU and UCLA, like the Harvard and Yale of theater schools. Okay, maybe you're majoring in theater, but at least do a double major in something. And then it was like, at least after this, get your MBA.
Right.
And then it was at least take an accounting class.
Yeah.
And then I started, there were all the years of like working odd jobs and going on auditions. And it was like, at least get a real estate license. And it's just like the things kept moving.
The backup plan.
And I always used to say to my parents, which again, I may disagree with if I was giving that advice today. I said, if you have a fallback career, you're always going to fall back on it.
Right.
And I think what I meant by that is if there's a more stable path that's always more lucrative, then it's going to make sense to put everything into that. And just like there's no real way, like, are there people who are doctors who have also become successful actors, like Ken Jeong? Of course. But he didn't do those two things simultaneously.
Right.
He couldn't both go to med school and work on a film at the same time. It's just not possible. So I think just that routing is a big thing. But in my case, no, I didn't want to have a backup career because I just thought I'd end up falling
So you
back
didn't
on it.
actually.
I did not actually get an MBA.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is why I don't have my own company. I just
But you
rely on
studied
deals.
sociology.
I did, yeah. I did double major in sociology.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you did that.
Yeah.
You were still a
But
nerd.
sociology is like, that's not going to get you a job.
It helps you though.
It does help
It
you.
helps you in acting.
For sure. I completely agree.
I think
Yes.
they're complementary
Yes, I agree.
subjects. So how does one audition to get into school?
So both NYU and UCLA, NYU is a BFA program. UCLA was a BA, but both had you have to audition, and then you have to turn in your academic application. So
Okay.
so just like applying.
So you
to
had
any
to do
school.
well in school.
You had to do well in school for both, and then on top of that, you had to audition and do. I think it was a separate essay or two on why you want to pursue this art form. And I remember my UCLA audition, which is where I ended up going. Usually for both NYU and UCLA, you have to do a classical monologue and a contemporary monologue. And at UCLA, the contemporary monologue only said it needs to be a piece written after, like 1950 or something like that, 1940. But it didn't say it has to be a play or a script from like these sources or whatever. So I decided at 17, I was going to do the beginning of chapter 3 from The Catcher in the Rye because it's written in first person. So the whole thing is essentially a monologue.
Right.
So I did this monologue, and the guy interviewing me, who was the dean of the theater school, said, well, that was very impressive, but I just need to ask you why you didn't follow instructions. The instructions said it had to be a contemporary monologue. Right. And I said, that is a contemporary monologue. It didn't say it had to be from a play, right? Like, that's a cockiness that you only have at 17.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? You're like, I would never walk into an audition today and be like, actually, you're wrong, guy giving me a job. So and he was sort of like, thought about it, and he goes, okay, that's a good point. Why did you choose this monologue then? And then we just talked about the work. But so that was the process. I assume that still remains the process for
Can you say a few lines from it now? Do you still remember it?
All I remember is the beginning line. It's like, it starts out, I'm the most terrific liar you ever saw in your entire life. Like a great first line, right?
That is a great first line. Yes. Yeah. Okay, so I'm just going back to the parents because I was speaking with Rochelle, who's the editor of Vogue India. Yeah. And in her podcast, she was like, I think parents have such an important role to guide their kids to say if I imagine myself to be qualified to be an NBA player, but I actually can't, play basketball that well. I feel like it is the responsibility of my parents to say, like, hold up a mirror and say, look, I know that you really want to do it, but maybe it's not on the cards for you to pursue this professionally. So in that case, it's specifically to do with acting, because there is no technical skill to kind of, like, I can't go play matches, lose them, and realize I'm not really good in school. Right. It's a very, very subjective field, like right at the beginning. So at that time, what do you think the role of parents is to be able to, how do they guide the kid to say, because there's so much heartbreak in your line. There's so much heartbreak, so much rejection. And that is something especially Indian parents greatly fear for their child, At that, so what is the parents' role in this? Like, even if you see the kid is going to fail, do you still feel like they should encourage the kid to go out and get the scratches and bruises, or tell them to have a fallback plan? Or
I mean, look, I don't have kids, so it's obviously going to be very easy for me to be like, here's what you should do with your children, parents. But I'm a big fan of failure. I don't think there's anything good that came in my career, whether it's from the business perspective or artistically fulfilling, that came from not falling on my ass numerous times. And you're right, first of all, that heartbreak, I think, exists for anybody who fails at anything. But if you're an artist, it's not rational why you've chosen this career. And so that heartbreak automatically becomes emotional. So you could be up against a VC, an investor, a casting director, somebody who's not giving you a job because it just doesn't fall on their quadrant of business. And to you, it feels like a personal attack. It feels like some deflated part of your artistic integrity, all of those things. I think those are all really healthy to experience. I think for me at least they were, right? Yeah.
Right, yeah. That's
what do you think? I assume
I agree. Yeah. I agree. So which is a failure in your life that you feel like you learned greatly from?
I mean, there have been a bunch, and I will say all right, I'll give you one example. I'll give you one like really fun, stupid example. I will also preface by saying you'd mentioned like, how do you know your kid is good?
Yeah.
And I don't know the extent to which there are debates here about public funding for the arts, or
there aren't many. No.
There aren't many, right? Or just let's say conversations about the importance of free speech or art in general. I'm a purist on this, because I'm a lefty American secular artist, right? So take that for what it is. I'm not saying that to create any controversy. It's just sort of how I was raised. But so in New Jersey, where I grew up, I had the chance to go to a publicly funded arts high school.
Oh, wow. Okay.
There was also a program at the time called the Governor's School for the Arts. It no longer exists because in the States there have been rollbacks on public funding for the arts. But at the time, they took 5 boys and 5 girls from your 11th going into your 12th standard all over the state. You would audition. They would take 5 and 5, and they would give you 6 weeks of intensive acting training from professionals from New York City who would come, and they would pay for you to live for those 6 weeks at a university campus in a dorm. Like, it was incredible. And I ended up getting in. I got one of those 5 slots. And so I didn't know, like, am I objectively good until there were those sorts of things where, okay, I got into this performing arts program. I got into this summer governor's program. Like, those were things that, especially as the son of immigrant parents who did not have an arts background, aside from one wonderful summer that I still can't believe my parents paid for me to go to a theater camp, aside from that, like, we didn't have the money or the resources to do those things.
Yeah.
So those were the things that said, maybe I'm good enough. But my parents called, and this I would say, like, if there's advice to parents, do this. My parents called the principal of the Performing Arts High School and the principal of the regular high school and said, we're very concerned that Kalpen wants to pursue a career in the arts. What should he do? And the academic high school principal said he should not pursue a career in the arts. It's very difficult, and he will probably not succeed.
Wow.
And the principal of the performing arts program said he should absolutely pursue a career in the arts. It's very difficult, and he may not succeed. But he's good, and he should give it a shot if that's something that he wants to do.
Wow.
And so the core of both advice was the same. It's going to be difficult.
Hard, yeah.
But the end result of that difficulty was different, right? And I think there's a value to that.
Right.
So that's, anyway, sorry, not to go backwards.
No, it is so important actually for these mentors for us to find these mentors and for these mentors to take their responsibility seriously, because I mean, had your parents listened to the first piece of advice, they would have probably not really been supportive. So I think it's very crucial, which is why I wanted you to kind of say, what should parents, like, how should their thinking really be? So you changed your name from Kalpen to Kal.
Yeah.
Why did you decide to do that?
So I'll do the disclaimer. Thankfully, not that it matters anymore, but I did not legally change my name. But I'll tell you that, so back in the day, this was around the time where, actually, this was when I couldn't get an agent, okay?
Right.
So most young actors, especially if you're at one of the top theater or film programs, you can get an agent pretty easily. I remember, at 18, I went for my orientation at UCLA. So many of the other theater students had already had agents.
But how? Do you not just pay the agent to be your agent?
No. So, sorry, great question. So agents work on a commission, so they get 10% of whatever you make.
Right.
So if an agent doesn't feel that you're either good enough or marketable enough to make money for them, they're not going to take you on because it's going to require a lot of work on their part. And so over time, over those first, 4 or 5 years, I had plenty of friends who were actors, friends who had agents. One in particular who I write about in my book, a wonderful actor named Jenna Von Oy. She was on a show called Blossom, and then The Parkers. You would know her if you saw her. She said, "You're so good, and you do all these student films, and it's just crazy you don't have an agent. Can I take clips of your scenes and show them to my manager?" He was a real A-list manager at the time. She's like, "He's probably not going to sign you because you don't have enough credits, but at least, like, I want you to meet with him. He can give you advice. He knows a lot of younger managers and agents." So I said, "Yes, sure." So I sent her the stuff, including my photo and all that. And she called back and she said, "So he doesn't want to meet with you, and I want to know how much you want to know." And I said, "Tell me everything. I don't like." Now I'm putting my business hat on, right? Tell me everything so that I can take whatever you're giving me and figure out what to do different. Right. She goes, "So he said you're really, really good." And he didn't have to say that. I was like, okay, then what's the but?
The issue? Yeah.
But he said somebody who looks like you is never going to work enough for it to be worth his time or the time of anybody he knows to make that 10% of whatever little bits you're going to get. So for that reason, he doesn't want to waste anybody's time. He doesn't want to meet with you. Forget representing you. Doesn't even want to meet with you. So I said, okay. She's like, "I'm sorry." I said, "First of all, thank you for saying that. Thank you for asking me if I wanted to hear the truth. I appreciate that. Now I can take that information and figure out what the hell to do, because you're telling me that it's not about the quality of my work. It's not about my resume. It's only about the way that you perceive me and the doors that are closed." And so around that time, I was getting new headshots, new photos. This is about the name thing now. So I was getting new headshots. And I had saved up for 6 months or whatever. And the week before, I was sitting in my dorm room at UCLA with some friends, and none of them were theater majors. They were like, "You know what, man? It's so hard for you to get an agent. Why don't you come up with a screen name? So many actors have screen names." I was like, "Who has a screen name?" My one friend goes, "Well, Whoopi Goldberg's name is not Whoopi Goldberg, it's Karen Johnson. It's like, really? She's like, yeah, could you imagine if she went by Karen Johnson?
Yeah.
She just would not
have
she
that
wouldn't
persona,
click,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Same thing with Chevy Chase. Apparently his real name is Cornelius. It's like
Right.
Cornelius is
Wow.
like objectively not a cool sounding name.
Yeah.
So then they were like, what about like we already sort of dropped the second part of your last name. So what if you went by Kal Pacino? And I was like, fuck you guys. This is not a productive conversation.
Yeah.
But it ended with like, hey, what if you actually just split your name in half and see if that makes a difference? So when I got these new headshots, I put Kal Penn, like split my name, added an N, and we joked like the extra N stands for not going to play a stereotypical taxi driver. And then I sent those headshots out, and I ended up finally getting one call from the one agent who represented me my first few years in my career. And I had asked her, I said, what was it about my thing that made you say that you want to represent me? And I'll never know, was it the new photos that looked more like me? Was it, I had to audition for her when I went in? Was it the name that was maybe a little more palatable? I don't actually have like a firm answer to this, but once you start working under any stage name, like you're not going to change your name because that's what people know you as. Yeah. But so that's the origin story of like, I truly don't know, was it just a fluke or did that have something to do with getting my first agent?
Yeah, so was your agent white?
Yes.
So do you feel like you having a white agent kind of helped you along with the change of your name versus if there was...
Oh, interesting. I mean, look, at the time I would take whatever agent was willing to sign me, right? I couldn't be picky. And literally 4.5 or 5 years into looking for an agent, that meant that every Thursday I would send packets of mailers out. Nothing was digital back in the day. I would literally physically send packets of mailers with my headshot and resume. So, 5.5 years of doing that weekly, I was ready to take whoever represented me. I think also there were like no Desi agents at the time.
Yeah. There weren't, I'm assuming. No Desi actors, no Desi...
There were some Desi actors. I mean, look, one of the folks like Sarita Chowdhury, who's now a good friend.
Yeah, but very few.
A Junaid, certainly very few. Certainly very few. I think that, the way I would think about this in terms of my name, a lot of people ask, were your parents upset that you were using a screen name? And I was like, I think if anybody knows anything about Guju parents and business, they're like, yo, you do what you gotta do to get that business.
I get that. People ask me, was my dad upset with Papa Don't Preach? I said, no, he was the first person I went to with this. And he said, amazing. Yeah. Like, young people will remember this.
Yes, exactly.
So.
Same with my parents. They're like, do what you gotta do if that's what's getting you your foot in the door. I will say the interesting thing about my agent, especially now, like 2025, everything in the States is so polarized. But looking back, we always give liberal Hollywood a lot of credit for the wonderful changes in diversity. And of course, the last 20 years, so much has changed and progressed. But my first agent she was incredibly conservative. I remember, she had a home office and she always had very right-wing yard signs, whether it was against marriage equality or against things like that.
Wow.
And she was also the only one who was willing to take on somebody like me.
Why did she take you on?
Because she thought that I was good, and she obviously was not racist. And she, not only was she not racist, if you compare that to all of the other folks in Hollywood who would love to borrow the end of your phrase, who would love to preach about what the world should be, but weren't willing to walk the walk on their own. This was a wonderful woman who was really willing to take on an actor who she thought was good and push for me to get in the room. And that first role, Van Wilder, she was the one who called, right? Taj Mahal. She was like, I understand why this is problematic. Yeah. What I want you to understand is the doors this will open if you take this job. The credit you'll have on your resume and the opportunity that I'll have to pitch you for things that are then devoid of stereotypes. Yeah. So I think all of that's a little more complicated. Like, to me, it's not about whether I could have an Indian agent or whether that would pigeonhole somebody.
I've spoken to other actors and they say there are no small jobs, like there are no small roles. So do you think at the beginning of your career it's okay to do, like, become a zombie in a film and then, do these bunch of smaller roles where you're like hardly seen for like 5 seconds? Do you think that adds to your body of work? Does it give you more credibility?
I think as a young actor, absolutely, or when you're first starting out, to me that's a no-brainer. You just kind of do, and that's like any other job. You take the job, you put it on your resume and you move on. But I would say even later in your career, like there are jobs that I will still take because I think they're fun. Yeah. I have 3 scenes in this movie Smile that came out 2 years ago. It's a horror movie. I'll spoil it for you. Fast forward 5 seconds if you don't want the spoiler, but I ripped my face off at the end.
Okay.
Like, it's a crazy, weird thing. I just liked the script, and so I wanted to do it. I have, I think, 2 or 3 scenes in this Snoop Dogg movie called Underdogs. For me, I think I'm not precious about genre.
Right.
I really like the most serious, artsy thing and the most appealing for the masses stuff. I had the chance to go visit the set of Tarak Mehta Ka Ulta Chashma.
I saw that. How was that?
It was awesome. It's the most watched show in India, if not one of the top 5. Like, I would love to do a cameo on that show. Why not? It makes people happy.
Is it happening?
I think so. I need to get like.
Oh my God, that would be so awesome.
I'm in the process of applying
Will you speak
for my
Gujarati?
I'll do whatever they want me to do.
Yay.
But like, so things like that, if you're on paper, you might be like, oh, what's the right strategic move for doing this show?
Yeah.
I'm like, sometimes there's none.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just like doing something and you think it would be fun and you're like, let me do this for 2 days.
How is it possible that you haven't become jaded about, like, in general in life?
I mean, I'm not going to be jaded on your podcast.
No,
That's after the second whiskey when you like come over for drinks.
yeah, but it's so easy. Like, I find myself getting really jaded and having like, so what, even if I make the best design, people are not going to buy it, and, people just want the same things. It's very easy to become like that when you are faced with, was it commercially successful or not? And that's not how most artists like grow up imagining their life to be. Those are not the success markers, really. So I find myself getting jaded. Do you see that happening? Like, does Rejection do that to you?
Does what do that to you?
Rejection?
Rejection.
Or not getting the role that you want?
There was an amazing acting teacher I had at a summer program in high school, and she said, you're going to face so much rejection. There are going to be roles that you really want or shows that you just can taste, and it's between you and somebody else. And when you don't get it, give yourself 2 days to mourn that loss. Because for them, it was a business decision, and for you, it was something passionate. So give yourself 2 days to mourn that loss. And then on the 3rd day, you have to let it go. You have to leave it behind and move on. And I've tried to do that. And sometimes it's less than 2 days, obviously.
Yeah.
Other times, if you feel yourself, it's going longer, you have to cut it off. That's been really good advice. But yeah, of course, you still get
So
jaded.
what's your pick-me-up, like, usually, when you're low?
I think it depends on the circumstance. Like, there have been, there's a show that I write about at the end of my book called Sunnyside. It's the first sitcom that I sold to a network called NBC. We got a great season out of it. I'm really proud of the show. Everybody keeps saying, oh, it's a show that was before its time. It was pre-COVID. It would have been better on an OTT platform. All of those things are true. It's also possible it wasn't funny for a lot of people, but the biggest reason that it only lasted 1 season is that we didn't have a marketing budget commensurate to the talent of the show. And if you look at other new comedies that were predominantly white casts, they had upwards of 3,000% more support from the studio. So when you talk about the advice that you've been given on showroom floors or whatever, this is sort of my equivalent of that, is you're seeing 3,000% of an investment made in marketing shows that are less diverse. So that obviously stings. I remain proud of what I created. It's heartbreaking. It's also infuriating.
Yeah.
Because these same people are the ones who, if you put a microphone in front of them, these executives will talk about how proud they are of, expanding the playing field and all of that. I think both of those things are probably true, but so that one took a lot longer. Like, that one was like, oh, well, I tried, and everybody said that they wanted this thing.
Yeah.
And also then you question, like, the audience said they wanted this thing, and they didn't show up for it. So then, like, the deepest part of your insecurity sort of kicks in, is like, so was it just not good? And if it wasn't good, I'm the first one to be like, it wasn't good. Let's learn from why it's not good. But when there's so many mixed messages, having to sort through like why something didn't work, there's the artistic part of it that, I'm sorry, but needs more than the 2 days when it's something that dire.
Right.
And then there's the business side of it that just makes me go, I want to take 2 steps back, take the emotion out of it, and figure out what I should have done differently, which is where I realized, okay, you should have sold it to an OTT. You should have been in a few more meetings. You should have multitasked less.
Yeah.
Your team was great. You hired the right people.
Right.
All that stuff, right? But so like just taking a beat to figure that out, to me, just
So would you do it again?
I would do it again. I would do a show like that again. I mean, obviously I'm not going to recreate the same show, but now I have, talking about failure too, I have like a skill set that tells me the right questions to ask when I'm pitching a show. We had multiple offers on it.
Right.
I would have probably gone with one of the other people who
Right.
offered, but I may have even gone with the same network. I just would have asked different questions.
Right.
I would have asked about marketing budget. I would have gotten guarantees in the contract in order to go with certain people. The marketplace is changing. You can't compare a backwards thinking ad-driven model to an OTT subscription-driven platform. Those are all things I just didn't know from personal experience, you know?
Yeah. So I think from what you said, the landscape is changing. It is becoming more diverse. And I share this with my friends who live in LA and New York, that it's only after I started interacting with them. They're also business owners. They built their brands. So my work connected me to them. And it's only after conversations with them that I finally started being proud of being Indian.
Oh,
Before that, living here, we would always look like we grew up watching Friends and Gilmore Girls and, Seinfeld and things like that. We wanted to be anything but Indian. Like, I wanted to be American,
yeah.
And then when I meet with them and the way they speak about India and Indianness and Indian roots and how they're incorporating the ethos into their brands, that's when I was like, oh, wait, like, I think it is kind of cool to be Indian, So you're seeing that shift happening. There are a lot more successful Indians who are putting a name out there in the West. And naturally, the yoga and the health industry and all that is focusing again on India.
Yeah.
So we're seeing that shift happening. And even if you move beyond India, just South Asians in general, there is a lot more representation. Like you're seeing Bridgerton and things like that come out of it. So do you really feel like there is an actual change? Like there are more possibilities and opportunities now? Or do you feel like that is still some time away?
I often get versions of this question, but also I talk with my counterparts about this all the time, right? In my case, I certainly feel like there's a moment happening here and happening in the States that's different from previous years. I always put a little bit of caution to people saying that there's a singular moment where somebody's arrived.
Right.
Like I remember when Aishwarya was on Oprah 20 years ago, maybe?
20 years ago.
Right? And everyone's like, well, now that's the shit, man. Now everybody's arrived.
Yeah.
Now it's equal. Now like the doors have opened, whatever.
Yeah.
I was like, I think this is wonderful for Aishwarya. She's on Oprah. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And all of us are very proud of that. To then extend that to there being a moment, I think, is a little rich. Same thing with Slumdog. We're incredibly proud of Slumdog. It's a British movie.
Right.
Right? It's not an Indian film.
Right.
And it's a wonderful film, and it deserves all the accolades it got, and incredible talent. Dave is wonderful. The whole team is great. But, like, I was also very cautious of, like I was at the Golden Globes with them, and we celebrated them. But to then extend that and to say, Indians have arrived in Hollywood, I think, again, I would put like a little bit of a pause on that. I think the better benchmarks, which are the ones that you're suggesting and talking about, are across all different brands. Is there an opportunity? Is there space for all of us to share stories? Are those stories only insular, or can they exist in other places? So then I look at content like what a lot of the work Gunit Monga is doing.
Yeah.
Obviously, Priyanka does stuff here and in Hollywood and around the world. Mindy Kaling's projects resonate all around the world.
Yeah.
We've had the good fortune of something like I'm surprised how many people here have like fixated on my episodes of How I Met Your Mother, which is not a show that I wrote, right? I was just in a season of it.
Yeah.
But so there are all these different examples of, like, to me, those are the benchmarks that make me go, oh, this is interesting. Like, there's an opportunity to work in a different way that exists now that maybe didn't exist 10 or 15 years ago. And then in Hollywood in general, I really credit a lot of the OTT platforms with that diversity, because it, like, you're taking what otherwise would have been perceived as a business risk 20 years ago, and you're creating shows that everybody watches. And I'll just use the Harold and Kumar example for this. That movie came out 20 years ago this year, which is crazy. But when it came out, it failed at the box office, and nobody remembers this. It lasted, I think, barely lasted its initial 2-week run. Almost nobody saw it, and the word around town in Hollywood was, see, we told you 2 Asian American men cannot open a studio comedy. Nobody wants to see that. And talk about feeling down and questioning yourself. I remember for like 2 months just feeling shitty, but feeling like I thought that wasn't true. I thought for sure the script is so funny. I don't know if I did a good job or not, but the script itself was good. I'm proud of this thing. How could nobody have seen it? And then the movie came out on DVD and on HBO with zero marketing dollars, and fans found it on their own. And they didn't just find it in diverse cities like New York and San Francisco and Chicago. People were buying this thing in Milwaukee and in Alabama and in Mississippi and Oklahoma and Omaha, Nebraska. And if you looked at the numbers of where people were watching this, all of a sudden this movie was doing huge numbers, and that greenlit a second and third Harold and Kumar movie. So that also just showed me like it's an archaic way of thinking about an audience, this idea that that diverse audiences are the only ones who watch diverse content, and quote unquote white audiences only want to see white actors. That's not correct. I think all audiences want content that they can laugh at and with. I love that the parodies in Harold and Kumar appeal to Democrats and Republicans in the U.S. and people all around the world. Like, I can't walk down the street in Bandera without getting love for the movie, and I love that too, right? So all of which is to say, I think like it's undeniable the last 20 years, the amount of diversity and the way things have changed. There's a lot of conversation, obviously, about, and now in the States with our new president, whether DEI is a bad thing. I think business-wise, you're a testament to this too globally. DEI makes all of us more competitive. If we're more diverse, we're more inclusive, people who speak multiple languages, points of view that are different. There's a great show on a network called FX in the States, still one of my favorite shows the last 5 years, called Pose, that was generally about the Black trans community in New York City in the early 90s. Tremendous show. I'm not Black, I'm not trans. I was fixated on this show. The majority of the audience is not Black and trans for this show. You don't have to be. That's what good content is it's opening up a door to worlds that you never have the chance to experience. And I think that exists a lot more now than it used to.
Yeah, but just talking about that, when you spoke about your film, that it was a failure in the theaters, but then it became a cult classic and it still lives on today. Why do you think, at least here in India, Bollywood films are not doing so well? There was never a time where I couldn't just, want to just go and watch a movie in the theater. There weren't like 3 or 4 great movies competing for my time.
Yeah.
But now there are weeks where there aren't movies. And there are weeks, and there is like long phases where there are no good songs coming out of Bollywood, And I think that it's happening also internationally, that the number of films, the box office hits, and the way we used to hear about like the Titanic and Avatar, and like we don't hear about that so much now, unless it's like Avengers or something like that. At least not here in India. Yeah. Why do you think that's happening? Like, because when I look at Harold and Kumar, it is a very simple plot line. It's nothing complicated, but it became a cult classic. What do you think is the formula for success? Like, do you know what makes for a great piece of content?
I think the reason that's not happening in Bollywood is because Shah Rukh and I have not done our buddy comedy yet. Like, I think that's,
I would agree.
That would obviously drive.
Yeah, I think I should send him this.
The bucks, please
podcast,
do.
Yeah.
I can't speak for India, right? But in the States right now, one of the there's been and there is a contraction in the entertainment industry. There are a number of reasons for that, many of which are obviously above my pay grade and my knowledge as an actor. But a couple of the real red flags on that I think a lot of content creators have noticed is that COVID, of course, was a big disruptor. Everybody was at home, but a lot of us worked during COVID, and it was the weirdest thing where like, you were allowed out of your house, or you were, I worked mostly in Canada where American productions were at the time, or my productions were at the time. And the border was closed. The U.S.-Canada border was closed unless you were a medical professional, a truck driver, or an actor. And I was like, how the hell do I have a carve-out to cross a closed border?
I didn't know that.
Part of it was because the media companies were willing to invest in PPE, masks, and testing, regular testing, and keeping all of the benchmarks of distance and all that to, as safely as possible, create content. Governments wanted this to happen because people were stuck at home and they wanted content. So I think it showed everybody the resilience of what was possible. Those companies obviously made a ton of money. Some of those subscriberships kind of like either hit a ceiling or went down afterwards because people are back to work. They're maybe not subscribing as much. Prices went up. After that, we had a really protracted strike by the Writers Guild and the Screen Actors. I'm a member of both. A lot of that was over things like AI, where the big media companies were basically saying the equivalent of like, we'll give you a couple $100 and then we own you forever and we can make other characters out of you and take your script and feed it into some
Yeah,
new
and that
creation.
went on
It's
for
like,
really long.
no, we're not gonna do that, right?
Yeah.
So you had a long strike during which I think they saw that their cheaper things that they were making were good enough, or they had banked things earlier. There's a lot of conversation about some corporate takeover and some acquisitions that are happening in the US. All of that has led to a real slowdown. So my hope is that it'll bounce back. My hope is that it's not just going to be the like $100 million movies or the thing that you self-finance, but it's a real moment of like, how are we all moving
Reckoning,
forward?
yeah.
What are we doing? Yeah.
But do you think it's changing now the way people are approaching talent and content? Like, is it becoming more thoughtful now, looking back at all the stuff that has failed in the past 2 years? Is it changing, or people are still repeating?
I think a lot of people are
storylines?
scared though. Like you have your mid-level executives who are, the mandates change all the time, right? Like you'll write I won't get into specifics, but there's a script that I wrote at the advice of the last mandate sheet that I saw. Agents
Right.
compile mandate sheets, and here's what, Amazon wants this, Netflix wants this, et cetera. So I wrote the script with my writing partner. It's really good. I'm very proud of it. It will come out at some point. But then we sent it back to my agent after we did all the notes. I was like, let's go out with this. And they're like, actually, this doesn't fit anybody's mandate right now. So then one of the two questions you have is, do you either go out with it anyway?
Right.
Or do you hold? Because
Would
you
you
can
do
only
that?
really go out once,
Would
right?
you do it though?
I'm going to hold.
Yeah.
So I decided
Makes
to hold.
sense, yeah.
But I have a friend who wrote a different script, different genre. We have the same agency represents us. They said, this doesn't fit anybody's mandate. He went outside of the agent, like not behind their back, but just said, okay, if you don't feel comfortable with this,
Independently, yeah.
independently, thank you, that's the word, and sold his show.
Right.
So like, okay, even though there wasn't a mandate, you still have buyers who are like, actually, this is very good. So I just think it depends. The point of all that, again, is not to throw shade at any of these participants. They're all friends and we all work together. But it's like sometimes you just don't know. There are growing pains at every step of,
Yeah.
if you work for a big company and you're in charge of this mandate, you don't want to kind of like spin things on its head. I'll give you another different example that's just like, I'm a fan of this, but also I was part of this, is when Trevor Noah left The Daily Show.
Oh yeah, he's left?
He left The Daily Show
I've been
last
wondering
season.
where he is, why there are so many guests, and you were on it too.
Yes,
which was,
yes. So he left The Daily Show, and then they were trying to figure out what to do, and they decided for a whole season they were going to have guest hosts.
Yeah.
So I began this really big lobbying campaign to like, A, I want to guest host, and B, I want to permanently host The Daily Show.
Right.
So I guest hosted twice,
Yeah.
once 2 years ago, once last year. And the reason I hosted the second time was there were like 3 or 4 of us who were shortlisted. They called and they're like, we're putting you back on for a second week. It's basically down to the 4 of you. One of the 4 of you will get the permanent gig.
Right.
It's like, okay, this is amazing. I'm going to shoot my shot. I think my second week, Virdas flew out and
Yes.
was my guest. Zoya flew out.
Yeah.
So we had like a really global array of guests. Loved it. Like that was one of those jobs that I'm just like, I could do this for the next 15 years. And then we get this call that's like, so it's not you. I'm like, okay, thank you for telling me. I appreciate it. I'm a fan of the other 3 or 4 who are on the list anyway, and we were all so different. They're like, but also it's not one of the other 3 or 4. I was like, what? Like, we can't tell you who it's going to be. You just have to wait.
Oh my
Then we
God.
waited, and the next day there was this big article in Deadline, Jon Stewart is coming back to The Daily Show. And I was like, this is amazing. How can you be mad at this? Like, I'm
Right.
such a huge
That
Jon
makes
Stewart
sense.
fan.
Yeah.
The Daily Show writers are incredible. So all of which is to say, there are all these weird
Cogs and
things
Things
happening that
and
like that's one of those examples, Shubhika, of like that's something that I found out I wasn't going to get that I really wanted, that I was not distraught about.
Right.
So I'm like, number one, it came down to me and 3 other people. Number 2, the guy who got the show is one of the guy who grew the show back in the day that I grew up on. Like, how are you
Yeah.
going to be mad about that?
Yeah.
You know?
One of my favorite characters that you played, Gogol Ganguly on The Namesake. I think that was so special because a lot of us got to see you in that very somber and like deep avatar
Yeah.
for the first time, probably. And it opened you as an actor to a lot of Indians, like that particular film. So, and that was also like a lot of Indians have dealt with that, a person dealing with self-identity at the same time tradition, and you showcase that really beautifully in the film.
Thank
Did you resonate a lot with that character, or was your journey different from his?
A little bit of both. So the reason I resonated with that character is actually different than what most people think. So in my case, obviously big fan of Junpa's writing. Fun tidbit: John Cho from Harold and Kumar turned me on to Jumpa's writing to begin with. We're both avid readers. He more so, and he was horrified that I had not read Interpreter of Melodies. So he gifted me that book. Then when Namesake came out, we both basically read it together. Tried to get the rights to it, and found out that Mira had already done so. So then I began this really aggressive campaign to get her to let me audition, and it turned out that the only reason that I got my foot in the door, I wrote her this letter. My agent wasn't able to get me an audition. I wrote this letter to her that was basically like, you have to let me audition. One of the reasons I'm an actor is because of Mississippi Masala and seeing what you had done when I was a kid. And so this is like my version of that. The reason I love Jumpa's writing is that I resonated with it because of how intimate I found it to be. So it was less the similarities between Gogol and I. Obviously, they exist. But I loved that Gogol became an architect because it was a perfect mix of his love for engineering and art. Right. So it wasn't either or.
Yeah.
So it was less the kind of cultural stuff and more his inner struggle. But then the way her writing is like everything from his ATM password to the specific dorm room where he lost his virginity in college. Like these are such intimate character things that are rare in a novel. So those were the real reasons that it kind of attracted me to it. But it turned out that Mira's 14-year-old son Zoran was a huge Harold and Kumar fan, and that's why she read my letter. And he had been telling her, "You have to audition Kal Penn," showing her clips from Harold and Kumar that only hurt my case. I found out. She was like, no, he's showing me these stoner movie clips. And I was like, you're obviously the wrong choice for Gogol. So I tell that story sometimes because had I not done Van Wilder based on the name of the character, Taj Mahal, I would not have gotten Harold and Kumar Go to White Castle because it was a resume builder that got me in for Harold and Kumar. Had I not done Harold and Kumar, Zoran wouldn't have seen it, probably wouldn't have gotten to do The Namesake, which is one of my favorite roles. So that's sort of the full circle and also why I was kind of drawn to the project.
So how was it working with Irrfan Khan?
Oh, man, incredible.
Yeah.
Irrfan was one of those, I think, rare actors. He was just so giving and warm as a person. But I'm a really big fan, mostly in the comedy space, of using silence, right? Most comedians do. It's like you were saying, the sense of comic timing. But Irrfan could communicate almost entirely without even needing to say anything. And there's one of my favorite scenes in The Namesake is when he and I are in the car and he's recounting why my character's name is Gogol. And just that scene alone, there's very little that's actually said.
Right.
There's not a lot of dialogue in that scene, and it's a really impactful scene. He was also really funny.
Yeah.
And there's a scene that didn't end up making it into the film with dialogue. It was a one-line scene. It's when, after his character passes away, Gogol goes to his apartment and then goes to the morgue and has to identify his dad's body. And in the script, when the coroner opens, what's it called, where they keep bodies in the morgue, drawer. I guess, the thing in the drawer in the morgue. And his, he's lying there. He actually had to lay in the thing. And there's a line, where are his glasses, that I'm supposed to say, because he doesn't have them on.
Right.
And so really somber scene, like I'm in it, right? I'm just fully in this scene. The drawer opens and I say, where are his glasses? And dead Irrfan character just goes, they're in my pocket. And I was like, dude, what the fuck? Come on. Yeah. But so funny.
Do you feel like if you're talented, you will succeed? Like, do you think that's true? Or do you think there are multiple things at play?
No, I 100% don't think that if you have the talent that you're necessarily going to succeed at anything. There are the equations of right time, right place, but also things are incredibly competitive, right? Like, if you believe the talent would get you anywhere, then you could look back and say, oh, the reason that things weren't diverse in Hollywood is that we just weren't talented enough.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not true.
We were all busy being doctors.
Right. Look, I think there are multiple reasons, and the community, of course, is there a role where the community has matured and there are more of us pursuing these careers? Of course. But I don't think there's always a shortage of talent. I rarely have beef with other actors, especially we compete against each other. But the reason you're getting a job over somebody else, there just isn't room for all of us in terms of how competitive things are. Right. So that doesn't mean that somebody else isn't just as good. Usually when an actor gets a job, it comes down to like, okay, well, you're the right height compared to the woman you're playing opposite, or you know, you look a little skinnier or you look a little fuller than somebody else. Yeah. So that's why you're getting this part. So don't change how you look, or we'll cast you if you can, you know, drop 15 or gain 15 in the next 6 months. Like there's all those factors that don't really have to do with talent. That's how much talent there is out there, you know?
Yeah, that's so true.
What do you think, though? I mean, how does it work in your field? What's your...
there's multiple things. I think the reason why my brand is recognized in the US, which is like a lot of Indian brands aspire to do that because there's a large community there, there's better spending power, there's more appreciation of like Indian handmade goods. But there's a reason I became successful versus multiple other designers who are probably better than me is not because I'm more talented. I feel like it is right place, right time, and a lot of other factors kind of stacking up for you. And for me, I inherently believe it's grace. There is a spiritual element in that. Like, I don't think it's mine to boast of my success. Neither is it just me, my team. Everybody works hard. I know so many incredible people who are working hard. So I don't even think it's hard work. I don't even think it's just resilience. I don't think it's just courage. And I think there is that element of grace. So I anchor myself in that, and that kind of helps me, which is why when I was asking you, what is your pick-me-up, I'm essentially asking you, what are your anchors?
I see. Well, first of all, we share that philosophy of like, there's the hard work. I'm incredibly proud of the hard work. I'm the first person to talk about it. Yeah. But it's the right place, right time, for sure. I think in terms of anchors, you know, one of the reasons I live in New York and not LA, I don't hate LA. It's easy to throw shade, obviously. I loved LA. I loved all the time I spent there. You just
like being able to walk to places.
Maybe. I like being able to walk. It's true. I like being able to walk to places. I'm probably taking the train home from here instead of just like sitting.
Wow, okay.
Took a car here so that I looked camera ready, but you know. But yeah, I like being around people. I like the idea that I live in a place where not everybody does what I do for a living. That is very anchoring for me. Yeah, diversity in thought. You know, yes, of course, I'm known as a left-leaning guy. I worked for the Obama administration. All of those things are true. But I really enjoy talking to people with whom I disagree. You know, friends who maybe are big Trump supporters or big supporters of other people on the right. I get a lot out of that conversation. It makes me understand parts of the world differently. And so that those types of relationships to me are kind of grounding, or being around the world, right? I don't know where design inspiration comes for you, but for me, a lot of character building. You know, you'd mentioned like double majoring in sociology. That did help a lot in terms of like how I can explore different roles that I play. But being around people who are different, especially if you're talking about comedy, like just being out there in the world and taking it all in like a sponge.
Everything is subject matter.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So do you enjoy doing stand-up more than, or just comedy more than the others? Or?
I love them both. I just like I was saying earlier, I'm not precious about genre, and I'm not picky about the type of storytelling. Like, obviously, my first love is probably comedy because that's my origin story, and it comes more naturally. But you know, did this docuseries on Amazon during COVID called "This Giant Beast That Is the Global Economy," a kind of a nerdy, tongue-in-cheek, sometimes funny, sometimes serious docuseries. I did one on climate change solutions for Bloomberg. Very different than a Van Wilder, you know.
Yeah.
But I like them all. I haven't done a whole lot of stand-up, and I'm starting to get into that space. You know. You asked about sort of like career journeys. This is probably a good one to talk about. I think most stand-up comics understandably start in their 20s.
Yes.
And that generally, at least traditionally, has led to like, okay, you do stand-up, you crush it at stand-up, you get a TV deal, you get your own movie.
Yeah.
It's kind of rare to do it the opposite, where I've had the blessing of like paid my dues, have my own TV or movie stuff going, and then at like 47, I'm like, I think like, I think I want to try stand-up. Like, what is this world like,
Yeah.
But there's a moment, and my stand-up influences are pretty varied. It's everyone from like a Shane Gillis to an Ali Wong or Veer Das. Like, there are just so many touch points of what you can do that I'm really curious about trying that out. I've only done it twice so far, but it's a thing that I want to pursue for sure.
So where do you think ambition comes from?
I think it's different for each person, right?
Yeah.
I think it depends on what you want to do.
Like when you're young, there's a lot of folks that there's a part of you when you're younger, like I want to show the world, or it's more to do with survival, that I really need to do it and I want to own a house, a home, etc. Like it could be different, markers, as you're saying.
Yeah.
But what do you think it is, like in humans or in you particularly? Where do you think it came from? What was your driver?
I think in my driver, there was a catalyst when I was in 8th grade, when I was 14. Doing this school play, it was not the cool thing to do. I was playing the Tin Man in The Wiz, which is the urban Wizard of Oz. And there's this line that the Tin Man has after he gets his heart. It says, "All you fine ladies out there, watch out." And it's meant to be very sweet. It's meant to be, watch out, I'm now part of the dating pool, right? It's supposed to be sweet. And we were forced to do 3 scenes from the play in front of the whole school. So not just when it went up in the evening for all the parents, but like truly forcibly for all the students. And we all protested this. We did not want to do this. Like the worst thing for a 13-year-old is to like be forced to go in front of your classmates who didn't want to see you do this anyway. And we go up there. We had to do that particular scene. And for whatever reason, like you've heard this phrase that actors use sometimes, like I was in the zone.
Yeah.
Like I was so deep into the character that I didn't know what was happening around me. Yeah, exactly. So there's like, 500 of my 13-year-old classmates, and it's I get the heart as the Tin Man, and I'm supposed to walk to the edge of the stage and say, "All you fine ladies, watch out." Instead, I walk to the edge of the stage. And I remember apparently I go, "All you fine ladies out there," with this like bravado that like, where the hell did this come from? And I did this massive pelvic thrust that was not scripted. And I said, "Watch out." And I like turned around and walked back to where I was supposed to stand. And people went crazy. Like girls were screaming. Everyone applauded. Everybody was laughing. And when I got on the school bus to go home that evening, all the soccer players who usually would like torment the drama club kids, they just had questions. They were like, "Why didn't you tell us that's what you were doing? That was so cool and funny.
Yeah.
Whoa, that was awesome." And obviously I have the language to describe this now, but when I was 13, I remember the first thought I had was like, "F you. Why is the onus on me to explain to you what I'm doing?"
Right. Wow.
Like for you to not torment us, why is that on me?
Right.
But number 2, I'm recognizing that like the way to communicate with you is by making you laugh. That there's like a magic here that I think is so great. And so as an adult, when I look back, I think one of the reasons I loved comedy, and I would apply this now to this totally polarized world that we live in, comedy is still one of those things that can bring people together. I would say the same with food, fashion, sports, music.
Soft power,
Yeah, these are still things that like somebody who I might disagree with on a whole number of issues is still willing to like laugh at a dumb joke I'm making. There's a magic to that. Yeah. And that's really at the core of what I love doing as an actor.
Yeah. Do you agree with that line, poet needs the pain? Do you agree? Artists need pain?
Hey, it's so subjective, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. In my case, look, I can point to learning to be funny through being bullied in 7th and 8th grade. That's probably part of where I learned to do that. I don't know if that's the case with everybody, but I think a lot of stand-up comics are pretty open about like, here's some dark shit I went through that made me funny, right?
Yeah. But you think it is essential? Like I used to feel a lot of insecurity when I was younger that, I'm not one of those typical artists who had it really rough and like I came from nothing and I built this brand. Like I had to understand my privilege and how to use it responsibly. Like much later in my life, I kind of understood the shadow side and the light side of privilege.
Yeah.
And I always crave, like growing up when I heard John Bon Jovi say like, "The poet needs the pain, I need you." And I was like, that is what a true artist is,
Yeah.
So I always ask this question to all creative folks I meet. Like, did you also think that you needed some kind of angst or some massive trauma in your life
I don't
story?
think, I mean, I see what you're saying. I don't think anybody sought it out.
Yeah.
I don't think that I ever thought, let me seek out some
Of course,
like
I don't think
experience
you
to
seeked out,
feed.
but do you think it's essential to the making of an...
Here's how maybe I would answer that question. pleasantly always known fellow artists or actors to be generally pretty open about things like mental health, for example, right? Even when I was in college, I remember all the theater students would be like, hey, there's like free therapist services on campus that almost all of us were like, oh, that's awesome. Just like you go to the doctor for your physical mental checkup, like we should all take advantage of something like this. Even back in high school and then since, I think most artists, a lot of actors are very open about like, oh yeah, I had this session with my therapist. It was good or it was bad or it went well or didn't go well. Like we're always, I think, bigger advocates maybe than traditionally other traditional professions about like, hey, make sure that you take care of all different aspects of things, probably because of what you're asking is like, we just want to make sure that we're present in all the different ways. So that's probably the first thing I think of when you ask a question like that.
So do you think it's very important to have a social media presence? And do you think young actors, not just young, just actors need to put themselves out there? Does it make a difference?
I don't know. I think, YouTube has tended to be a good source for like just kind of testing the waters, seeing what works and doesn't. TikTok Reels obviously do well for people to test out whether material does well or doesn't. I don't really have a big TikTok or Instagram presence. I post stuff, but I don't think it's certainly not like, I don't have the, I don't rely on it as a follower level. Maybe this will change stuff like that, right? Maybe there's a role for it. I don't really have a Twitter.
No, but what I'm trying to ask you, does it make a difference? Like when agents are sitting with you or when studios are considering you?
Yeah, I think, look, if I had more followers, would it probably make a difference for certain campaigns or certain roles? Yes. But I also think we're past the point where, 5 or 6 years ago, you would hear stories about like, hey, it's between you and a TikTok star.
Right.
Like, okay, and you're calling to tell me they're going with the TikTok star? That's fine. That's what you're looking for is different. I think that happens to every traditional actor. It's like if you want somebody with traditional acting chops, you know where to find me. If you want somebody with 20 million people who follow them on social and that helps your bottom line, totally get it. I'm just not competing with that, It's a different sort of thing. And I've also gotten calls later on that like, man, we shouldn't have gone with the TikTok star. That guy's not an actor. I'm like, right. Well, my beef is never with other artists. I'm not going to be the person who tells you that person's not an actor.
Yeah.
You've figured that out. Next time, give me a call. Happy to do it. By the same token, if you want to, if you need that instant like built-in audience of 20 or 30 million people, you should hire that guy. Don't hire me.
I don't think it's guaranteed anymore that you'll get the audience or the eyeballs or anything like that anymore. I think that what you're saying, you get a lot of subject matter, you get a lot of content, you get a lot of that from your personal connections and people.
Yeah.
So people are really, really important to you as they are to everybody. You came out very, very late in your life about your sexuality and you are engaged. I thought it was recent, but it's 6 years old and we're waiting for the big Indian wedding.
Right.
I'm really excited about that. I'm sure my team will be also like, we can start planning for you if you'd like.
I'm down for that, for sure.
Yeah. So firstly, why did you come out so late in the day? Or did you feel like it wasn't really important to come out?
It's a good question. I mean, first of all, I'll say like, yes, there's no timeline on when anybody chooses to share or figures out on their own their sexuality, their identity, different parts of who they are. I think that's a wonderful thing. I know plenty of people who figured themselves out when they were 5 years old, and you hear those stories. I was like, I'm envious of that guy. And plenty of people who are in their 60s or 70s when they figure it out. After my book came out, there have been a number of uncles and aunties of that generation, not people I necessarily know personally, but who had reached out saying, hey, I figured this out, after my husband passed away or whatever. And those are really incredible stories to pay attention to also. I can only speak to my experience. And in my case, I had been out personally and professionally for a long time. I just hadn't shared that part of my identity publicly because my partner is not in the public eye. He doesn't have a public-facing career. Similar to my parents, who like I said, you met my dad. My parents and my brother have been to like every movie premiere, just like my partner Josh, since we've been together, the last 13 years. But they like will not do the red carpet. They're like, no, beta, tu ja. This is your thing. I do not want pictures of me on the red carpet.
Even your mom?
Even my mom, like on occasion, they've been fine with it, but they'll usually, the way marketing works, this is like a carpet is to promote something. It's
Yeah.
to sell a movie, and it's to like, to like tag your friend who hooked you up with the dope shirt, like
Yeah.
all the things that it's there for. And I think my parents and Josh understand that, and they prefer the quieter side of that, where
But romance
they don't-
sells on the red carpet.
It does. I mean,
Like-
look, but there are certain things that I don't think you necessarily.
You
There are
don't
plenty of
pander
people
to.
who enjoy the public side of that, and there are plenty of people who prefer kind of keeping their private life private. So for me, it was mostly just out of respect to my parents and to my partner that I hadn't shared that. I think the naivete on my part was when I wrote about them in the book, especially Josh. It's in a chapter that's about a first date gone wrong and car racing.
NASCAR, yeah.
And I was very naive, I think, about how much interest there would be in that chapter. And so had I known in retrospect that people would take that to be a coming out chapter, which of course people thought it was if they didn't know,
Yeah.
in my head, here I am being out
Open,
for
yeah.
13 years at work and in my personal life. But I probably would have done something different. I probably would have been like, gone to the New Yorker and been like, you want to publish this chapter 3 months in advance? Because the
Yeah.
book is not a gay book, right? The book is
Right.
not about that experience. It's about
Yeah.
systemic
But
change.
people
and-
thought it was
They thought
your
for
coming
good
out
reason, of
story,
course.
yeah.
I understand why they would have thought it was. That was the naivete on my part
Yeah.
is like, I think it probably, was disappointing if you were looking for an LGBT-focused book.
Right.
But also maybe took away from like, it's an incredibly sophomoric, like funny, dumb book full of dick jokes and, that appeals to probably a Harold and Kumar audience as
Yeah.
much as it does
Yeah.
to systemic change.
I'm going to read that now.
I also did the audiobook, so if
Yeah.
you're more of like a stuck in
No,
traffic and
I'm
listen.
a reader, yeah.
But I'm really proud of that chapter too. Like I'm very proud of my relationship with Josh, and really proud to share part of that with readers. Also, I'll say that despite my naivete about including a chapter like that, maybe without any further context, it's been a really amazing experience to have folks reach out and to say either I didn't know that, and here's my story with my identity, or one thing I'm not naive to as a performer of color is knowing that our visibility certainly matters, and so I am proud that chapter matters to a lot of people, and I'm really proud of having written
because
about it,
I think there's also that very stereotypical way of thinking, at least in India, that there are certain careers if you take, you will turn gay.
What are they? Fashion?
Fashion, painter, artist, a lot of that, so there is that line of thinking, and it's like, अच्छा इसकी वजह से ये gay हो गया,
Right,
ये fashion में है इसीलिए gay हो गया,
Right.
So it's
Right.
very important for folks like you to come out for the community to like talk about it, and how like it was so natural to you, which is why you didn't really make a big deal out of that
Exactly,
chapter, because
yes.
it's just something very naturally that was happening in your life, and
Yeah.
everybody who mattered kind of had accepted it. I'm guessing the parents were all okay, family was pussy
yeah.
aunties were all okay, so I'm guessing it was very natural and normal for you to
In my case, yes, but I also am mindful that that's not everybody's experience.
Yeah, it's
right?
not.
And it's one of the reasons why I was a little when I say I was naive about that particular chapter of my book is like, if you want a good story about navigating sexuality or navigating identity, like, read Malik Panchali's stuff, go buy Chasten Buttigieg's book. There are books that are about that are
Mohsin's
wonderfully
book,
written.
A Suitable Boy,
Yeah,
was
exactly.
amazing,
Right?
yeah.
Like, these are books that we all should read. So it was almost like, don't buy my book thinking that that's the story
Right.
that I'm telling, because my experience was also very different than a lot of those folks. And I'm so glad that they shared those stories, because I think it matters to a lot of folks whose voice is different. Also, I think that this idea of like, our mutual friend Alok and I talk about this often, this idea of what it means to be straight passing.
Yeah.
Right? Is that if you conform to traditional definitions of what
Yeah.
people perceive to be masculinity, which is of course not what masculinity actually is, but if that's the perception, then of course your experience is going to be very different navigating your identity or sexuality
Yeah.
than it might be for somebody who maybe doesn't conform to that. And I think those are valid conversations to have also. And I certainly can't speak for people who have had those other experiences, but we certainly should support everybody in the community. It's a very diverse, very vibrant community. It's obviously not just folks in film and fashion. It's doctors and truck drivers and rickshawalas and school teachers and politicians and everybody in between. So
Absolutely.
And it historically has always been, right?
Historically,
in India especially, you can see that 5,000 years ago.
Oh, absolutely.
You know?
Like, that's why I posted this yesterday and it got the least number of views, but it was talking about the Kinnar community and how it was mentioned in the Vedic and the Vedas of India, and how it was such a beautiful coming together of Vishnu and in the Mohini avatar, you know. And that is such a powerful story of why it is auspicious to actually have and live with that community alongside everything else. So I think we just got so distant from that thought. And unfortunately in India also, what we've seen, there is so much westernization of everything that was very inherently natural, normal, and ingrained in us because of the Britishers coming in, and a lot of these things becoming taboo, like this parda system and all that. It didn't exist in India. It came with the Mughals. So just kind of like, you know, peeling off layers for me has been fantastic to come back in touch with like what our Indian ethos were.
Totally.
And how religion also has kind of taken, or like Sanatan, the Hindu religion has been contorted to become something so patriarchal, whereas it was not, because there is so much Devi worship and there is so much of presence of Kinnar community and them being auspicious and their blessings before you start anything new. And we're just so cut off from all that. It is because of the westernization and
post-colonial sort of identity.
You know that feeling when you rip off a cheap nipple cover and instantly regret all your life decisions? No exaggeration. Well, that's about to change. Nipposh is here to change the game. No adhesive, no irritation, no pain, no redness, and the best part is that you can use these for up to 300 times. So ditch the disposable drama and switch to Nipposh. Your very conscious decision to move from acting at the peak of your career. And I don't say that peak like it's gone, but like at that time, you were doing House, and How I Met Your Mother was before that, right?
No, that was after.
That was after that.
That was after.
And that is when you decided you wanted to participate in public service and contribute to the society in a big way. And you moved to the White House under the Obama administration.
Yes.
And the most crucial, like one of the most talked about, is your overturning of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So can you just shed some light about, why did you make that decision? Was that a scary or heavy decision to take? Was it a conscious decision to make? Did that impact your very successful acting career? And were there certain issues that you specifically knew you wanted to take on or contribute to? Or did it all happen just... So many questions.
Okay, so first of all, thank you. But so in 2007, this is how long ago it was, right? I was on House playing a doctor, so everybody was happy. And Olivia Wilde, who's a wonderful actor, director, she was on House with me, and she had a +1 to a Barack Obama campaign event. And I was not very political at the time.
Really?
You had mentioned my grandparents, and so, you know, we grew up in this. They were Gandhians. They marched with Gandhiji. You know, we grew up with these like Hindu secular Indian values. That was kind of the, you know, obviously you go to the mandir with your parents and grandparents, but they also encourage you to like, oh, your friend's inviting you to go to church, you should go. Friends inviting you to go to masjid, you should go. Like, you know,
very tolerant,
very tolerant. But I always viewed that as a family value. I never viewed that through the lens of politics.
Right.
And so Olivia says, I have a +1 to a Barack Obama campaign event. Do you want to come? And I was like, nah, I'm good. She goes, but I saw you reading Obama's first book. And I was like, sure, I read books about all sorts of political figures I have an interest in. It doesn't mean I need to go meet them. So she keeps asking me, like, for whatever reason, like the second day, she was like, hey, I still have that +1. Do you want to come? It's next week. I was like, no, dude. It's a campaign event, right? So presumably they're going to ask for help with something. Why don't you bring somebody who's political as your +1? She's like, I just think it'd be fun to go with you. Third day, she was like, have you changed your mind? I was like, dude, no. It's like, I mean, it's an open bar. I'm like, oh, it is? Sweet, I'll come. So like the open bar thing basically made me go. But before going, I'd done a little research on Obama, and now looking back, of course, people are like, "Oh, it's Barack Obama," but at the time, you have to remember there were 12 different candidates running to be the Democratic nominee for president.
Right.
Hillary Clinton was viewed as the person who was going to win the nomination and then probably win the presidency. So it was a real underdog sort of situation, and I liked what I heard at this campaign event. I was really inspired by what Obama had said, and so I was like, all right, I'll sign up to volunteer.
Wow.
Olivia also signed up to volunteer, and that was going to be like 2 days of volunteer work in Iowa, which was the hub for, I won't get too into the weeds about American elections, but basically that was the first state that would vote in sequence. So I went for a weekend, really loved the people who I met there, and it was all very young, very dynamic people who had volunteered. So I kind of stayed, and it was something I was able to do with my acting career. There was also a screenwriter strike at that time also. So I stayed in Iowa for about 2.5, 3 months. And
So it was just impromptu
sort of an impromptu thing that that I didn't think would turn into something. And then Obama kept winning these early nominating states, and I had the chance to go to ultimately it was something like 26 different states on behalf of the campaign. I focused mostly on outreach to young people and then also to cultural diplomacy, which was something I was also studying in graduate school.
Right.
And
it's interesting how it all connects.
It's weird how it connects. I mean, he had an arts policy committee that focused on cultural diplomacy and arts education, which is something I knew enough about as a commercial artist, right? So then Obama wins the election, which nobody thinks is going to happen, and there's an opportunity to serve in government. And so I just couldn't figure out a way to say no, not as a career shift. I knew that I didn't want to do this as a career, but I thought if I give a year or two as a sabbatical from acting, how do you say no to something like that? The opportunity to serve your country, to work in the White House, especially to work for the first black president. It just seemed like a no-brainer, and so I was honored to do it. Some of the issues that you asked about, what was I passionate about working on? I mean, you don't dictate policy at my level. I was a mid-level public engagement staffer, so that was basically I worked in the outreach office. I was the president's point person on youth outreach and on outreach to Asian Americans and on outreach to the arts community. So those were sort of my 3 jobs. But within that, I was on a team of people that did outreach on things like our healthcare law, colloquially called Obamacare, but was called the Affordable Care Act, that increased health insurance for X numbers of millions of Americans. The repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which allowed LGBT service members to finally openly serve. The T part of that, unfortunately, has gotten rolled back by both Trump administrations.
Oh, really?
A number of other things that were less sexy that you just didn't read about in international news, like grants, higher education grants for college and university. There were a number of things that I was really proud to have the chance to work on. Then things that did make international news, like Obama was the first sitting president to personally celebrate Diwali, which both Trump and Biden had done afterwards. And so there were things like that were also just very personally relevant and fun.
But can you just talk about what your mind space was? You joined in where you didn't think Obama would become the president, and you kind of just saw him winning one thing after the other. So what was that doing to you? And
I thought at the time, back in the day, so you have to remember there were a two-party system, essentially, right? 2 viable parties in the United States. And both of them were essentially run by legacy families at the time. You had multiple Bush administrations, and then you had potentially multiple Clinton administrations. And I'm a left-leaning guy, but at the time I was also an independent, which is something generally I've returned to. Being...
It's an interesting time to return to that.
Interesting time to return to that, for sure. But because of that, it was just this idea of like, oh, I think we can be better. You know, there were only 2 candidates, I think, at the time who were rejecting something called federal lobbyist money. So basically special interest money and corporate special interest money in American politics. And that was Obama and a guy named Ron Paul, who was a Republican, actually.
So this is like pharma companies or like...
Exactly. All of that influence, the idea that that influence should not be part of the political process.
Yeah, so many questions.
Yeah,
there.
but these were the reasons why I thought, oh, it'd be great to support a guy like this. I had the time to do it because House was on a temporary pause because of the screenwriter strike. So there were all of these reasons why I thought I would do it. But then the decision to serve your country was something that sort of like being an actor, I guess. It was just equal parts complete stupidity and equal parts just like wanting to do something that you feel is the right thing to do. I didn't have a...
but 2 years, you committed...
Well, it was going to be a year, and then you realize the government works very slowly. So if you actually want to see the things you're working on get accomplished, you maybe have to stay a second year.
So what did your day look like there?
Kind of depended. There was no standard day.
Did you have to report to the White House, or were you...
Yeah.
Could you work from home?
You couldn't work from home. I worked in a building in the White House complex called the EEOB, which is the traditional, like, the building you think of as the White House is generally where the first family lives.
Yeah.
And then the West Wing is a little offshoot from that. There's a little walkway to a massive building where most of the staff sits. And you kind of shuttle back and forth between the West Wing on that walkway and your office.
The West Wing was a big show when I was
It was a big show.
younger,
Big show when I was young too, good show. Fairly accurate, except I was bummed like my first night working till 11 o'clock and I thought you could order Chinese food like CJ Craig.
Oh, you can?
No. The Secret Service confiscates any food that's delivered because it could be poisoned.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that, right? I was like, oh, damn. So you can't really get food delivered.
Right.
But there was no typical day. But you generally start around 8 in the morning and you're there till, 10 o'clock at night, I would say 6 days a week in my job. Part of the reason is I had terrible time management skills because I came from being an actor to taking a leave of absence to work a desk job as a bureaucrat, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my hours were a little longer than most because I had terrible time management, not because I was doing amazing
So what
things.
were your biggest accomplishments just for your own self during that tenure that you think your contributions mattered? Or
I'll answer it this way. I mean, truly, I'm not just saying this to be falsely humble, but especially in the Obama administration, there are tons of people who work on each specific issue. There were a couple of things that I was tasked with spearheading, right? And so one of those was an initiative called the White House Initiative on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders.
Yeah.
So that was basically like a task force that was designed to serve that particular community. And there were a number of these initiatives for any, rural Americans, Irish Americans. There were executive orders that would target them. The Asian American one was interesting because it's an umbrella group. I don't know how nerdy you want me to get, but it's an umbrella that represents, tens of millions of Americans essentially. And Asian Americans, it's silly to put them in one category because that encompasses Indian Americans.
And they're so diverse.
So diverse, different immigration experience,
Absolutely.
different language access issues, different health issues. So on one hand, it was a way to streamline government resources. It was also a way to save federal funding and not be wasteful about it. And it would also serve these communities better. So I put that piece of paper up and running. Like I saw it through this big federal review process for it to ultimately get signed by the president.
So do you feel like there is real work happening, like genuine want to do good? Did you see that in the...
Yeah, I can only
West
speak
Wing?
to the administration that I worked for. And look,
Right.
I had the privilege of working for a White House where the majority of people who I worked with did not previously work in government.
Okay.
So they came from either the private sector or from public policy
Right.
or NGOs. Those were the people who the president wanted there.
Yeah.
I can't speak for anybody who came after. I know,
Yeah.
the Biden administration, he had 40 plus years of people who had worked with him. So
Yeah.
it just automatically was going to look like a different
different,
administration, a little.
So I was invited to the White House, probably to the last Diwali party.
Okay. Did you go?
I did.
Awesome. How was it?
Yeah, I flew back down. I was on this long trip there. I was doing pop-up shows and trunk shows across.
Yeah.
And I landed back, and I think within 7 days, I got an invite to come to the White House.
Yep.
And I was like, I've just come back, and I was exhausted.
Yeah.
But my friend said, well, this could probably be the last one.
Yeah.
And it's such a great honor. So I did go there. But what I want to say is the sentiment there was amongst all the Indians that were gathered. They said, like in a few months, everything is going to change. The Trump administration is going to come
Yeah.
in. And we may not be invited here. And a lot of us may probably, there is a possibility we could be asked to go back home, deported back home.
Sure.
Which brings me back to the question, how do you not feel jaded about a lot of things, having worked with somebody like the Obama administration and then seeing Trump
yeah.
come to power, and Trump come to power for a second time?
I mean, look, first I'll say what may be the obvious, which is Trump had Diwali celebrations.
Oh, really?
Yeah. We just weren't invited because we're,
Left.
Yeah, obviously. He's not going to invite me. I mean, Biden stopped inviting me once I started speaking out about,
Right.
human rights and things I disagreed with the Biden administration on. That's just what happens.
Right.
I don't have any ill feelings,
Yeah.
towards anybody for that. I'm curious to see how the Trump Diwali turns out, but
Right.
if he has one. But in terms of not getting jaded, I mean, it kind of depends, right? You do get jaded. Our politics are much more polarized and divisive than they were even when I worked at the White House.
Right.
I tended to work on issues related to young Americans the most. And so whether it was something like the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell or climate change legislation, which never ended up getting passed,
Right.
Generally young people agreed with those things. Even young Republicans wanted there to be civil and human rights protections for LGBT folks at the time. They wanted the healthcare law to pass. They wanted there to be checks and balances on climate or on funding for education.
Right.
Generally speaking, it was more of a generational shift than it was a political shift. I don't think that's necessarily the case right now.
Yeah.
One of the things that I'm jaded about more is it's not necessarily my disagreement with Republicans or with the Trump administration. Obviously, we have those policy disagreements, but it's the fact that I don't think Democrats are offering solutions for young Americans in particular and
Right.
the things that they care about. So it's not that they all suddenly went and voted for Republicans, it's
Right.
that a lot of them stayed home because they weren't seeing a path forward for progressive solutions on climate, on the fact that the cost of living is 20% higher for a lot of them. All of those real world things
Yeah.
that they're just
And
not.
education.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that the Democratic Party has become very moderate on a lot of those issues, thinking that they're going to capture Republican votes, which obviously was never going to happen. That was a giant miscalculation. So I think the folks on the progressive side need to be progressive and stand up for the actual values, and not just values, but put out a policy proposal that's going to show people a bold way forward that's going to affect their bottom line. You have Trump saying, this is the reason why your bank account is being depleted. And Republicans are like, here's a 15-page policy plan on our theories. I was like, what? What are you
Right.
doing?
Yeah.
No. He has a very simple
The
thing that
Democrats
he-
are saying that.
The Democrats are saying that. Where I'm saying it's just
Yeah.
so where I'm jaded is not just in this Democrat versus Republican thing, but it also doesn't make sense to be jaded. It's more of a question of what are the solutions and how can we do better. So there are a lot of really great people that I am hopeful about. I mean, not to go full circle on the namesake with you, but Zoran Mamdani happens to be Mira Nair's son.
Right.
He's the reason I got the namesake.
Yep.
He's been a really effective member of the New York State Assembly. He was
wow,
elected
okay.
out of Queens in New York City. He's farther to the left even of me. There's plenty I disagree with him about.
Right.
But he's been doing a really great job, and he's running for mayor of New York City, right? So there are a lot of local
Wow,
solutions.
okay, I didn't know that.
Some
That's
great people in LA and in Colorado and in Mississippi that, are like, wow, those people are doing really great local and state work.
Yeah.
A lot of young mayors, so
I'm going to ask you a very big question. It's not
Yeah.
really nuanced at all, but do you really think it's possible? Change is really possible. Real change for climate, for education, for healthcare. Is it doable, like realistically, for any party to come in and to be able to have that real impact?
I think it's doable, and I think we've done it in the past. Now, if you're asking me, like, the doomsday clock versus is it too late for something like climate? Yeah, I have no idea, right? I think American leadership and credibility has been damaged. That's obvious. I think even my friends who support President Trump would say that that version of American credibility no longer exists, but they don't necessarily want that version of American credibility. And so I think that's totally fair. We can sort of agree on something like that. But I would also say that American credibility was eroded under President Biden and Vice President Harris, depending on the issue that you care about, right? There were tremendous advances in climate through something called the Inflation Reduction Act. That was amazing. And I interviewed President Biden when I was guest hosting The Daily Show.
Oh, really? Wow.
And I said, how did you get that done? Like, how did you get this amazing climate thing done? And the first thing he said was because of, 20 years of advocacy by young people. So, like, the tricky part about answering your question, like, can it actually get done, is a lot of times when government moves so slowly that imagine 20 years ago, imagine somebody who was like 40 when Biden actually was able to sign this piece of legislation. They were 20, protesting every day, maybe even getting arrested, for a protest, writing letters, caring a lot about climate. Then they graduate, they go on with their lives.
Yeah.
And 20 years later, they don't feel ownership over this success.
Yes.
Because things happen really slowly. But they should feel that ownership because that was responsible for something really good. I think what we're seeing now is most of the so-called governance in the new administration is through executive action, and it's through reshaping the government. A lot of those the president doesn't actually have the authority to do, which is why the courts have sort of stepped in.
Right.
But Trump governs through chaos. We saw that in his first administration. He's also phenomenally effective at what he does.
Right.
If you're a Republican presidents since the 70s wanted Roe v. Wade, our women's health and abortion rule, to be repealed long ago. Reagan wanted it, Bush wanted it.
Really?
Trump was the one who got it done through his Supreme Court nominations, right? So I think it's important to recognize that he's really effective at what he does, and he's serious about what he does. And so, like, I'm not going to feign shock when the things that
he says
he does. And I think it's important to, like, I think if we're paying attention, we shouldn't pretend to be surprised.
Right.
And I do think that it's possible. The pendulum always swings back and forth, but I'm not going to downplay the critical nature of, the things that he's saying he wants to do.
So you said you stopped reading the news or consuming news in general.
I'm not big on, like, the clickbaity news. You know what I mean?
So how do you stay updated? Like, what are
my sources of information?
Yeah, because
I mean, I still obviously read. I still read and consume news. In the States, I'm a bigger fan of, like, something like an NPR.
Yes.
Rather than, I think what I meant to say was cable news is not something that I really, right? Like, here, you guys are even, like, crazier with it here. There's like 16 people on one screen all screaming at each other, right? It's wild.
Yeah.
And then there's like one uncle and one woman in a sari trying to get a word in,
and then you find the one that you're against out of the 16, and you're like,
it's like, just as an entertainer, it's like, I could watch this forever.
Yeah.
We have our version of that. It's usually like 6 people or 8 at a panel yelling at each other. But that's not real discourse, right? That's just people trying to get their point in. So I tend to not watch that kind of stuff. It's more of, like, at home, it's an NPR or it's a CBS News even. Right. Globally, I like BBC and Al Jazeera. They tend to be pretty in depth with a lot of their reporting. So I think it's just staying away from, like, the things that are designed to sensationalize for clicks. Yeah. Also, what I'm saying is not controversial. Like, anybody who works in media knows the headline is for the click. Like, if it's a for-profit ad-driven model for news, they're trying to get you to click on it so they make money off of it. It's not necessarily the most accurate, most well-researched information. So the longer lead stuff, I think, makes a lot more sense. Even something like, on the Republican side, something like the National Review, I might disagree with on policy, but it's at least well-researched. It's longer lead, right?
Right. So do you feel like you'd ever go into politics
No.
full time?
No. I have no interest in running for office, if that's what you're asking, right? Like, but I'm still helping people who I believe in. It's more on like a local level. One of my dream jobs when I'm older is still to, like, I'd love to be an ambassador, a U.S. ambassador to a foreign country. India obviously would be amazing. I love it would be incredible. I just had coffee with my friend Eric Garcetti, who's the outgoing ambassador, and picked his brain. I was dude, what was the 2.5 years like? You know,
Right.
I did an event with Rich Verma when he was the ambassador in Delhi during one of my trips. We did a big youth event. But there are so many countries that I think have interesting relationships, whether it's in India, South Africa, you know. So look, that's like a dream job for
Amazing. No,
retirement.
it's good to know. It's good to know how you look at it like that.
I don't think we can abandon, if you have a passion for making something better, first, I don't think it has to be through politics, right? It can be through a brand like yours that's socially conscious, and we've talked privately about being immediately socially conscious and having your eye on what you can do that you're building for 10 years in the future. Like, I have my version of that in what I do. So it can be through your business. It can be through advocacy. Obviously, I'd also love to do it through government work on occasion, but just kind of depends. I think I just like making dumb jokes too much to want to do it full time. You know what I mean?
I know what you mean. Okay. So when you look back at your career, now before that I have a question. You spoke about being older.
Yeah.
Does ageism really exist for men, especially like people of color or even men of color? Because here it's mostly to do with women. Like aging is a big issue.
There's no comparison. Women have it so much
Yeah.
harder anywhere when it comes to ageism, when it comes to any barrier to entry. Like, I mean, to answer your question, yes, of course it happens for men too, but I think most of that is because content skews younger, right? But there's, man, the gender chasm is crazy, yeah.
So how do you see yourself evolving into your 50s and 60s?
Oh, I don't know. It's such a good question. I remember when was it? It was like, there was a pilot a couple years ago that was the first time, like, I played a dad.
Really?
But, like, the kid was, like, 9. I'm like, what? Where's can't I play the dad with a baby first?
Yeah.
My kid's 9 already? All right, fine.
But you're open to that.
Of course I'm open to that. I love storytelling, period. No matter what form it's in.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
So when you look back at your career, and I know that it's still a very young career, so to say, do you feel content? Do you have any regrets? Do you wish you had done something less or more?
I don't think I have regrets. I think having regrets is a waste of time. But I definitely think that learning from failures or setbacks is it's a necessity to move on. Otherwise, I think you get sucked into having regrets, right? If you're not figuring out how to kind of build off of those. Content in the things that I've loved, not content in the things that I wanted to do better at, and all of that I think focuses on like. I love what I do as an entertainer, writer, actor, producer, all of that stuff, and I'm always indebted. I feel really indebted to the audience that supported me, and I think that origin story comes from Harold and Kumar.
Yeah.
The fact that we only had that movie succeed because it was a cult classic that fans around the world found on their own, dude. Like, there was no marketing that told them to find this movie. So ever since then, I just have such a love for people who've supported me doing stupid things. Also, I think doing something serious, you have to bring some levity to it for it to really connect. Otherwise, you're preaching to like an insular bubble. I don't know that the short holds up anymore, but like 8 years ago, maybe a little more than that, I did a short film with Vice on the Mississippi state flag, which at the time still had the U.S. Confederate or the old Confederate flag. It's not a U.S. flag. It's a Confederate flag in its emblem. And so I spent, 3 days with these pro-Confederate flag people at a biker rally in Mississippi. And I had a great time doing it. My producer was like, "Are you sure you want to like embed yourself?" I was like, "Absolutely. And in fact, we should also get food together. And I want to meet their families and all of that stuff." And so you have that levity that on the one hand, somebody could criticize as saying you're normalizing this conversation. But on the other hand, I think you have to bring levity to serious divisive topics if your goal is to understand something. If your goal is to eliminate it from your psyche, then that's a different conversation. I also think I'm in a position of privilege where if the question is talking to somebody who not just disagrees with you, but disagrees with your right to exist, that's a very different conversation that not everybody should or would want to have for a very good reason. So I think one of the roles and privileges as an entertainer, or as somebody who has access to entertain, is making sure that you like have that entry point that can open up those doors. And a lot of times that's through humor. So nerdy way of saying that's why I don't view them as ranked, but sort of just kind of like laterally.
Yeah, that makes sense. What is one quality that you think every artist or creator must have, like, that can ensure that your career is one that lasts?
I think it's a truth. It's being truthful to whatever your form of storytelling is my
Right.
guess. I don't know. Like
What I noticed about you, and I
Yeah.
feel like that is one of the reasons why you've lasted as long as you have and you've been able to do multiple things, is because you have so much curiosity. Like, there was no reason why you came in here, visited my studio with your dad sitting there.
Yeah.
And you came up and you saw how we were doing the work and you wanted to know about the karigars. And I understand there was so much curiosity. And
Yeah.
I think that is what the real fuel of any creative person is.
I'm smiling like this because my niece, about 2 weeks ago, this is Josh's sister's kid, we were on FaceTime and she goes, I've decided that I'm like you. I said, why? She goes, because you always say, I'm curious. And then you tell me about some experience of yours, and I realized that I'm curious too. And I was like, that's a great quality. This is awesome. So I guess I hadn't really thought about it that way. But yes, certainly, I think having a natural curiosity for something, for any artist, is important. But it's also how most people live our lives if you're in this profession. This random, like, day I remember shooting The Namesake. There's a scene at the end of the movie. So after there's a scene where Gogol, my character, is going through a box of his old childhood toys as an adult, and Mira came over just to see what toys the prop guy had put in there, and there were a bunch of these little G.I. Joe like war action figures, these army guys, and she goes, "Who put these war action figures in this box?" And someone's like, oh, we just threw them in there. She goes, get rid of them. I'm not trying to promote war in my movies. Now, I don't know that, I certainly didn't register it, and I'm the actor portraying this role.
Yeah.
I don't know that anyone consciously would have registered that Gogol pulling out G.I. Joes was a signal to how normalized war is in American culture or global culture.
Yeah.
But Mira was like, subconsciously, this will impact every viewer with this is normal.
Yeah, we all played with G.I. Joes and G.I. Janes growing up,
But so that curiosity, I think, that's a great example of what you raised, which is that natural curiosity, but also that eye for detail that I think most artists have within whatever our little thing is, makes sense.
You know, I always ask this question to everyone. Each industry needs a disruption. What do you think your industry needs right now?
Our industry is being disrupted, so I don't know what it needs to counter the disruption, because the disruption right now is causing a contraction. So I don't know what that.
So you think it actually needs to calm down? No.
It needs to calm down in one way or another right now. I don't know if this is going to hold up.
Pick one.
But like, we need to.
Okay, so what are we going to see Kal do more of? I was like, should I say Kalpen? No, but I want to speak of the artist.
Sure. So I have a film that I finished at the end of last year called Trust Me, I'm a Doctor. It's like a dark comedy independent film. It was a book as well. It's based on a book. So that's doing the festival rounds early this year. So hopefully comes out later this year. There are a couple of pitches and shows that I'm going out with next year. Or no, sorry, next month this year.
Okay.
So hopefully
2025.
some of those sell. And then focusing a lot on stand-up and writing.
Wow.
So trying to get that off the ground.
But let's talk about your book. You were just at the Jaipur Lit Fest and you got sold out, and I'm dying to read the book.
I need to send you a copy.
But I didn't read it before this because I was like, my curiosity has to be really activated right now.
Keep it fresh.
Yeah. Talk about it. Why did you feel like you needed to write the book? Because you have such a visual medium where you can connect with your audience and talk to them?
So I wrote this book called You Can't Be Serious. The title obviously is because it feels like almost everything I've done in my career. Somebody's like, oh, you're not allowed to do that, or you can't be serious. You want to be an actor. You want to go work for the White House. Seemed like a fun title. But the reason I wrote it is I felt like there wasn't a book when I was 17 or 25 that talked about how to navigate making choices that the world thinks are mutually exclusive. It's the idea that you can multitask, that you can do something that's creative and something that somebody thinks is totally crazy. I wanted the subtext of the book to be that. So it is about systemic change in Hollywood and in Washington. But mostly it's just a dumb, funny book. Like my inspirations for this book were like Tina Fey, Mindy Kaling, like memoirs like that I can read if I'm on vacation or if I'm on the train, laugh my ass off, and still take away something heartfelt. That's the majority of the book. And it's because my story was about, being an Indian American actor who started out at a particular time when there weren't a whole lot of us, having the chance to do these movies that took off as cult classics, becoming friendly with the incoming, first black president of the United States, and what all those experiences were like. It just seemed like if the 17-year-old me could read that, he would have still been a crazy person who did his thing. But there isn't really, not that this is a self-help book, but there isn't really there haven't been those benchmarks of hey, this is okay, or hey, we're allowed to do this too.
Yes.
So that was the biggest reason.
And everything is okay.
Everything is okay, yeah.
It's okay. Because, when you're in the midst of a lot of change and stuff like that, you feel like it's the end of the world, especially when you're young.
Yeah.
So for me, what I always gain from these books, and I consume a lot of books by, of course, famous people, but successful people, just life stories, to know that, okay, it turns out to be okay one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like how you said, every failure has kind of taught you something very, very crucial, like a life skill almost. You took almost 4 years to write this.
Yes.
Was that a conscious decision, or each time you felt like, oh, there's more to tell?
I'm just a really slow reader, and so an even slower writer.
Right.
No, I think I just kept writing things and trying to string stories together. There are a lot of stories of failure and triumph throughout the book, and then the last chapter actually ends with this story about the show Sunnyside that I told you about. That was both triumph, and then ended in a bit of failure because trying to figure out why something got pulled off the air, realizing the discrepancies, all of that. So it didn't need to end. Not that the book ends with something that's unhappy. It doesn't.
Right.
But even in later chapters, since it's chronological, it was important for me to bookend that with something. And the first few drafts of the book that I had written up until that point were before this experience of selling the show and then having it only last one season.
Right.
So I was waiting for a while to figure out, how does the book finish? Especially, it's like a lot of people who write memoirs are in their 70s, right? And so what happens when you're doing that in your 30s or 40s? It shouldn't just be like an open... It needs to be somewhat open-ended at the end. And then, I think this is the case for many actors who write books like this, especially if they're funny books. I don't need to see my face on a bookshelf.
Yeah.
Like, if the book doesn't do well, then that's fine. I've gotten my answer of maybe you're not a writer.
Right.
So I took the time with it because to me, it wasn't about deadlines and getting the book out there. It was about making sure it was funny, that it was heartfelt, all the things that I want readers to take away from it. And then, of course, when it became a bestseller, or at the Jaipur Lit Fest, when it sold out on the second day, I was like, okay, this is such a wonderful feeling because I did it the right way. I took my time with it.
Yeah, and it's going to help so many folks. I just have a question about how do you structure your day?
Yeah.
And then we'll end with that. Don't worry, I'm not going to make you sit here for longer. But just as an actor, because, you can have a lot of work suddenly and then not have any work for really long. So how... And it's very important to have something to go to or get up for, right? So what are your tips or pieces of advice? Like, how can a person kind of structure their life in a way that you just don't...
This is so subjective, and I'm smiling because I know I told you that at the White House, one of the reasons I worked long hours is I had terrible time management skills. Nothing has changed in that regard. I have terrible time management skills. Also, as a creative person, I don't know how you feel, but there are days... Talk about why it took 4.5 years to write the book. There are days where you wake up at 7 a.m. and your laptop is open and you need to crush a chapter and nothing happens for 2 weeks. You wake up every day at 7 because that's when you're supposed to do it. Then suddenly at like 3 a.m, you wake up to get a glass of water and you write a half a chapter because something came to your mind, and then your next day is ruined because you were up for 6 hours, right? That's all part of the reality.
Yeah.
There are other things like, working out really centers me. It clears my head. I can't do it in the morning.
Yeah.
I'm like doing cardio at 2 p.m, which then is like your whole day is thrown off.
Yeah.
Because then you're showering at 3:30. You're like, what are you doing?
Okay,
a
this
dinner
is not
meeting?
the
Like,
answer we expected.
It's not. It's a mess. The times I'm most structured are when I actually am shooting something.
Yeah.
Because then you're up at 5:30. Your only time to get the gym in is necessarily in the morning. You're rehearsing every morning before you shoot. Like those are very well structured 3-month periods, and probably the reason why the rest of the year is not structured.
Yeah, I have 2 more questions. Do you think it's important to study?
Yes.
Like a lot of folks ask me, is it important to go to school for fashion? So you think it helped you?
I think it helped me. I also think that there are, if I'm being fair, there are plenty of actors who have never traditionally studied who are also doing quite well and really know their craft.
To name a few.
I don't want to. Not off the top of my head. I'm just talking about people you work with who, I'll say something like, so where'd you do drama school? And they're like, oh, I never went to college and never professionally studied theater. But they have, tremendous long resumes. So I don't think that's uncommon. I think in my experience, it helped a lot. I also think as a performer of color in the U.S., having training, and I'll paraphrase, there was a woman who I saw speak when I was in college or after college. At the time, I think she was the only black woman on network television in the U.S.
Wow.
And somebody had asked her this question: How do you deal with rejection when you walk in and they don't hire you, and they don't hire you because you're a black woman?
Yeah.
How do you deal with that? And she said she had her MFA, I think. She had her master's in acting. She said, I'm classically trained in Shakespeare. They can see that on my resume. So if I don't get the job, I know that they know why I didn't get the job. And that's enough for me. Right. I have to leave it all out there. Does it bother me? Is it hurtful? Of course. But I know that they know that I've done everything I can to earn that job and to deserve that job. Yeah. So to me, that's why training also helps. Is I want to leave it all on the field. If you're going with somebody else who has no training, who's, traditionally better looking or any number of things, that's all good. Do that. Yeah. I just know that you know.
Yeah.
I know that you know.
That you know. Yeah. And as a actor, performer, how do you keep upskilling? Do you feel like that's important? Is there any, material you read up on, or like go and do some singing, or how do you keep up? So
a couple things. You're asking this question at an interesting time. Just before I came to the Jaipur Lit Fest, I had a meeting with my agents about theater, where I said I realized because of COVID, when I switched agencies, I've never met with the theater team.
Right.
And one of my goals is I would like to play the king in the musical Hamilton.
Okay, that's very specific.
It's only 3 songs. It's a very specific show. It's a very specific role. He only has 3 songs. Not right now, coming off of a cold. I can crush those 3 songs, but I had that conversation with them about like, how do I get the right vocal training at the right time? Can I do this on Broadway? Can I do this at the West End? That would be awesome.
Yeah.
But to me, it's conversations like that. The stand-up thing is the same thing. I know we already talked about it, but is it crazy to try stand-up in your 40s when most people try it in your 20s? Not really. It's based on your storytelling.
Yeah. So we're going to see more of you in India.
I hope so,
It could be on Tarak Mehta. It could be on the stand-up scene. It could be learning Indian classical and like doing a concert here for us.
It could be. I also want to do like some, I want to like work with Karan and some of Zoya's OTT stuff.
That's going to happen for sure. That's a given. When do you feel the most comfortable in your skin?
I guess all the time, but all the time. But I would say I'm especially relaxed around really close friends or family.
Okay, so we're going to move into rapid fire because we know that's your forte. Let's go. If you could reboot any classic film and star in it, which one would it be?
Dawn. The original.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
What's one movie role you regret turning down?
Ooh.
Or you wish you had gotten?
Wish I had gotten. Yeah, I'll do I wish I'd gotten because it was so far-fetched and Rami was so good I could never compete. But the Freddie, I always wanted to play Freddie Mercury. Right?
That would have been interesting.
Would have been cool.
Wow,
Yeah.
okay. If you could play any superhero, who would it be?
It'd be cool to play Superman or Spider-Man. Probably Spider-Man, honestly.
Spider-Man in your 40s.
Yeah.
That would be fun.
Yeah. Could be Spider-Man Cha-Cha
In some
if I wait till my
metaverse,
50s, yeah.
it's possible. Okay. If what's the funniest blooper that's ever happened to you on set, or that?
There are a lot, but there's probably, I mean, every day working with John Cho in the Harold and Kumar movies was just ludicrous. He's so funny.
Yeah.
I would say it's probably in Harold and Kumar Escape from Guantanamo Bay, we also had an actor playing George Bush.
Okay.
His name is James Adomian. And so it was just like, he knew that I thought it was funny if he stayed in character between takes. So he was very gracious to let me have that.
God, that set sounds like fun. Okay. If Harold and Kumar had a crossover with another movie.
Actually, wait, I'm going to take that back.
Okay.
Sesame Street. The puppeteers stay in character as the puppets, as the Muppets,
Right.
like in between
Okay.
setups. So I had a scene with Grover, and he was Grover, like
Through
even
and
when,
through,
yeah,
right.
it was awesome. Okay. It was that is a step above.
Okay. If Harold and Kumar had a crossover with another movie, what would it be?
Oh man, Karate Kid.
Nice. Yeah, that's cool. 3 books or movies you wish you could read again or watch again for the first time.
The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay is a book by Michael Chabon. It's a wonderful book. They've been trying to turn it into a movie for like 15 years or something. That's a good one. A book or movie that you could watch for the first time, Dead Poets Society.
Really? Okay.
It's a really, really good one. And then I got to go Bollywood with the third, Kuch Kuch Hota Hai.
So sweet,
Yeah.
Karan. Are you listening? Okay. If you could swap lives with any of your past characters for a day, like live it for real, who would it be?
Kumar, he has no
Really?
stress.
No stress.
He has no stress. He's cooler than I will ever be. I understand people think I'm like him, which I'll take any day, but in real life,
You do seem like you could be him.
All right,
like
good.
even through this interview, I
Yeah?
kept trying to ask you, is there pain? Is there angst? Is there anger? You were like, no.
But that's stuff you have to work on. I think for a character like Kumar, he's just chill from the beginning.
Were you not like that when you were 17?
No, and I think during the marketing for that movie, we always used to say, you know, John Cho is more of a Harold in real life, and I'm more of a Kumar in real. No, John Cho is more of a Kumar in real life. I'm more of a Harold in real life.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Is he still like that?
We've both changed a little bit, but he's a chill guy. He's a
Yeah?
great guy. Yeah.
Okay, good to know. What's the one thing that your fiance Josh roasts you?
Oh gosh, probably that when I leave the apartment, like I often don't think, this is a great one to tell you about actually. I don't often think about what I'm wearing if I'm just running an errand. Like if I have to go to the store real quick, I'm in like jeans, an oversized t-shirt, and a hat. And he's like, you cannot go outside that way.
So he's more fashion conscious then.
Not just fashion conscious. He's like, somebody's going to ask you for a picture in the pharmacy, and then I'm going to have to look at that online. Please take a shower
and
put on a shirt that fits properly. And I'm like, oh yeah, because you don't think about what you do for a living.
That's true.
Every waking hour, right? You're just like, I got to go get toothpaste.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go get toothpaste.
Yeah.
So it's probably that.
It's very different if you move here. You'll never have to go get toothpaste.
I know. I know.
You know that, right? Yeah, I was really very, very surprised, pleasantly surprised that Mindy messages me on her own to say, okay, you can ship it here. And I'm like, can you give me an assistant I can talk to? Because in India, if you're a celebrity at that level, and like you've been messaging me, I'll reach at 11, I'll reach at 10:30.
Yeah.
I'm like, why aren't you guys giving me like managers and assistants in the middle?
I mean, by the way, this is good to know because I always have to email Mindy's assistant. So I'll have to get her number from him.
If you're shipping her pretty clothes, I think she'll give you a number.
No, I think that exists, right? It just depends on your capacity and all of that. But yeah, it's different.
No,
Look, you
it's
have less-
insane. I feel like the work ethics there are much. I mean, it's of course because of the whole. You don't have as much help there.
Right. The economy is different.
Yeah,
and
it
all
is
that,
different.
yeah.
But it's amazing for me to interact with founders and like business owners there and even celebrities there. I find it so refreshing. It's so much easier to be like, hey, let's do something.
Oh, nice.
Versus here, it's like, okay, have you spoken to this one and have you spoken to this one? And it's
I see what you're saying. It is different. It is different. Yeah, I like both, but it's different.
Too many. Yeah, so you can come here, you'll never have to buy toothpaste. Who's your dream guest for a dinner party?
Oh. Is this one of those living or dead, or they have to be alive?
They could be anything.
I feel like it'd be fun to have Tom Hanks at dinner.
Ah, nice.
Right?
I would think you'd say Robin Williams.
Oh, well, if we're doing living or dead, it's going to be my grandparents.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Did you get to spend time with them?
I did, yeah. Yeah.
That's lovely.
It was very nice. Very kind.
Okay, and a celebrity would be Tom Hanks.
I'd say Tom Hanks.
Okay.
Although, you know what? No, I got to know and hang out with Post Malone a few times this fall. He's got to come to a dinner party.
Okay, that can
what
happen.
What a great guy.
One Indian dish you could eat every day.
Tindola Shak.
So sweet. Who makes it for you there? You cook?
I don't cook as well,
Okay,
but
your mom.
I try to live up to my mom's recipe.
Okay. Your go-to karaoke song?
It's good timing for this because it's changing up a little bit, but the most go-to is Let Her Cry by Hootie and the Blowfish.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, your life in a Bollywood song. Just the song title. Main Hoon Dawn.
It's a tie. Can I do a tie?
Yeah.
It's a tie between Mehudan and Chand the Chupa Badal Mein.
So sweet. Okay. Your guilty pleasure movie or series?
Love Actually.
Oh yeah, it
really
especially
good.
every December.
Yeah.
Just have to watch it.
Yeah.
Okay. Your first celebrity crush?
Oh boy. Candace Cameron. Which is funny because her mom ended up being my first agent.
What did you think of India sending Lost Ladies to Oscars? Do you have a view on that? Did you watch the film?
I watched it. I liked it.
We'll close it at that.
No, I mean, there is not a shortage of films, and every country. The reason I'm being brief is I also vote on the Oscars, so you're not like you're supposed
I
to
didn't know that.
keep things within a certain professional modicum
of course.
in press. But what's always very interesting to me for the international films and for the short categories is which countries send which films and why. And a lot of times that differs year to year. Obviously, a lot of times there are political reasons or artistic reasons. Sometimes it's just the best film. But in a country like India, there's no shortage of ones to choose. So everyone's going to have an opinion on whether it should or shouldn't.
Okay. Thank you so much, Kalpen. It was amazing
Thank
to have
you,
you
Shubhika.
here. And I want to
appreciate
see
it.
so much more of you. And there are so many questions. Like I don't want this conversation to end like
We'll do it
honest-
again after a few more
in
things
New
are
York,
out.
but I hope
Yeah.
we do it in India again.
Same.
And I hopefully it's happening around your show.
Same. That would be awesome.
Yeah, so thank you for spending your very, very busy India tour
Thank
time
you.
with us.
Thank
it
you.
means
Thanks.
a lot. And it is a wrap, unfortunately though, because even after 3 straight hours with Kalpen/Kal Penn, I've not had my fill, and I'm sure neither have you. This is a story that truly keeps giving. From Hollywood to White House to hopefully Bollywood soon, this is a true masterclass on how to carve your own path against all odds. So thank you so much for listening, for leaving your comments here, for liking, sharing and subscribing our content. I love that so many of you are resonating with all the stories of these epic humans that we are sharing on #Preach. And I hope to see you on the next episode soon.